And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys who got guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a million in my jacket.
Hey, welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. We got a big one today. First of all, we're going to do a humongous Q&A, 60-some questions. And then we're going to get to the Kennedys. Now, this Kennedy show is going to be very long-winded. And so what we're going to do is break it up into 2 episodes. So in the first episode, you're going to get the background of Joe Kennedy, the Kennedys, how they got their money. And we're pretty much going to take you right through John F. Kennedy getting shot. And then next week when we come back, we're going to do the second part, which is going to cover conspiracy theories and a bunch of other stuff. So there's going to be a lot of information packed into like an hour and a half. If I could try to do it that way, that's what I want to do. Also, there's a lot of stuff going on in Canada. 2 mob hits in the last few weeks. You can check out Mob Talk Radio on Facebook and kind of get the details of that, or follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Now, I don't have a ton of news to get to. I really don't even have a ton of gripes to get to. There's a couple of gripes I have, but there's something I wanted to talk about before we just jump right into the questions. We only have so much time, so I'm trying to do as much as I can here. But before I do that, I want to announce a couple things. The Flannagans will start production again in a couple of weeks. We still have some stuff we have to finish up filming. Second week of December, we start picking up to finish that. So that's what's going on there with that. Also, if you want a Flanagan shirt, you have got to go to omertamia.com. OMERTAMIA.com. Type in the Flannagans. It'll pop right up. If you want 20% off your total purchase of anything they have, including a Flanagan shirt, type in Mob Talk in all caps under the code section, and you will get 20% off of that. So if you want a t-shirt from the Flannagans, everybody keeps busting my balls about it, go to that website. That's where you can get your shirt in the size that you need. Other than that, don't ask me for it. I already gave away like 2 dozen. I don't have any more on my person, so you got to get them through the company. Visit OMERTAMIA.com and get everything over there. And get yourself a Stop Glorifying Rat shirts. People stop me in the street all the time and say, where can I get that? And I always tell them, and I don't know if they go or not. That's their choice. That's where you get the goods. That's where you get the shirts. All right, so gripe time. What do I have a gripe about today? Really not a whole lot, but I'm going to kind of talk in code a little bit here because I don't want to like get into details of certain things just because I'm not going to feed the beast. When you feed the beast, everybody comes out of the fucking woodwork, and there you have it. So there's something that, and when I say something, I don't mean it to be like there's this big thing going on. But I just wanted to talk about loyalty for a minute. Because I think there needs to be a clear definition of what the fuck that is. Loyalty to me, anyway, just my side of the fence, is that you don't talk, you don't hear nothing, you're deaf, blind, and dumb. That's just the way it is. That's how you're loyal. Doesn't matter if, a house is on fire. You just do what you got to do. You protect your friends at all cost. You do whatever it is to help them, and you don't ever expect anything in return because that bond of friendship is loyalty. Now, I've been loyal to a lot of people in my life. I really have. That's something that I kind of stand by. I'm a guy that you can trust, you can count on with anything. But there reaches a point where when that loyalty is not fucking reciprocated, that you got to move on. And how you choose to move on and go about your business is really up to you. And so over the course of this show and over the course of my life, there's been people that I've been loyal to a fault. You're loyal because they got street credit. You're loyal because they're good stand-up human beings. You give them an opportunity. Yes, there is a saying that loyalty is fucking earned, just like respect. You don't automatically give it. But with me, If you're somebody and you're cool to me, I'm loyal to you until you give me a reason not to be. And once I'm not, it's done. And without getting into a whole lot of specifics, here's my thing. Anytime, doesn't matter if I'm talking about like my radio show or helping people or doing whatever I do. Anytime you go out of your way to help somebody and they turn around and treat you like half a fag, or they turn around and they treat you like you're beneath them, or they treat you like everything's about them and not you, that's a problem. That's a big red flag, right? So there's an issue, and it's not even really an issue because I don't give a fuck. I've already made my statement. I've already picked what side of the fence I'm going to be on because I support my friends. And when my friends come to me and say, this is no good, that's no good, people are selfish, I listen to them because they're not doing it out of their own self-interest. They're doing it out of my best interest. And so there was something that happened that, I came to realize that, you put your neck on the line for people, you risk going to prison for people, you risk doing a bunch of stupid shit to help people because you believe in a cause, you believe in them. And when it's not reciprocated, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And so that's why I had to do some things that I had to do. And that's the end of it. And I think that the lesson here is that you can give loyalty blindly all day, but always know where the back door is. Always know where the exits are everywhere you go. And I knew where mine was, and that's what I've done. It's nothing personal. It's not business related. It's just simple. If I put myself in a predicament for a jam, and you don't give a fuck about me, you don't give a fuck about my situation or my circumstance, and I'm left to fight the wolves by myself, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I've done. It's in no way, shape, or form to trash anybody. I'm not even going to get specific about who I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to a fucking principle. Principles matter to me. And if I put myself in a fucking jam and all you can do is talk about yourself and your problems, then there isn't a friendship. Then it's a using type of thing, and I don't let people use me. And listen, I'm not saying this person in any way, shape, or form like treated me like shit or fucking abused me or nothing like that. It's just that I reached a point where it's not being reciprocated. When you don't get reciprocation, then you don't have a friendship. You have something that's based on what you can do for somebody. And me, I don't roll like that, and I'm just not going to roll like that. And if it creates problems for me, then it creates problems for me. But the one thing that I've always done is I stand up for myself. And I got a lot of friends in a lot of places, and I talk with a couple of people about the situation, and it seems like the same thing. I don't deserve that kind of nonsense, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And at the end of the day, these people know where my loyalty is. I mean, I think I've been pretty much absolute in my resolution about where I stand with things. And so you're going to have people that are going to nitpick and gossip and say all kinds of stupid, crazy shit. And that's okay, too, because that's just life, and that's how life operates. But when it comes to loyalty, you got to be loyal to people. You got to trust people. You got to earn that trust. But when there is a side group to a major group that treats me like family, treats me like a friend, doesn't lie to me, advises me, not because they want anything a certain way, but because they have my best interests at heart because we're friends, then I listen. Because there's no malice involved. The only principle here is honor and trust. And I got to trust what they tell me. And so that's why I do what I do sometimes. And it's just, so I want the message to get out is that people you think you can trust, you always can't trust. Sometimes there's got to be a situation where you're in a jam and you got to see how one side reacts to it versus another. And when a side that wasn't involved in this looked at me like I was fucking nuts, I knew then that from my perspective, that their only concern wasn't the issue. It was that I put myself in the issue trusting people, and I shouldn't do that. So there you have it. And that's what a real friend does. A real friend is not going to fucking tell you a bunch of nonsense. They're going to be straight up, honest, and blunt with you and say, look, this is what it is. Get the fuck away from these people. They're not good, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what a friend does. A friend doesn't tell you what you want to hear. And so, listen, I'm sure that, I'm not even sure really, but I know that this particular other friend I'm talking about probably checks out my show once in a while. And that person needs to know that that, I value and honor our friendship, and I always will. And anything that you advise me on, I take to heart. And it's a protectionary thing, I think, from my friends, and I appreciate that. And I think that they know, at least I hope they know, I would do anything for them. Anything. Other people, I won't help again. You get one chance with me, and then, you just got to move on or whatever. But on the other flip side of that, I know who my friends are and they aren't. And so if there's any sort of confusion, they just need to know that my loyalty is where it is. It's not going nowheres, and that's just life. So all that being said, it's just all I wanted to sort of stress to everybody is, pick good people to be around. When people don't give a shit about what they can get from you and all they care about is your welfare, your well-being, and to make sure you're a success and that you feel like you got friends you can count on and depend on when there's shit and there's stuff going on, that's what friendship is. I see a lot of people on Facebook and doing other things, and they're always complaining about, well, I trusted this person and they fucked me over. Well, if you only know somebody a month, what the fuck you expect? And so the reality is when a friendship is based on not what you can do, but a common bond, a common trust and respect and honor, like we talk about being a gentleman all the time on this show. That's what it is. When you're a gentleman, you conduct yourself in a certain way. So just so that we understand what the line is there. That's pretty much it. We're going to go to a commercial, and when we come back, we're going to get right into your questions. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. On a given week, I'm out of town a lot. Whether it's Philadelphia, it's New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, wherever the case may be, I'm always looking for a place where I can sit down and have a great dinner. Ambiance is key. Price is obviously key. But the most important thing is the food good? And there's a place I want to tell you about today. It's called Saltwater at Margate. If you are going down to the shore, because I know a lot of people in Philadelphia go to the shore, especially Margate, you're missing out on a great restaurant if you haven't been there. The name is Saltwater Margate. It's at 9401 Ventnor Avenue, Margate City, New Jersey. The phone number there is 609-289-8078. You can also visit them online at saltwatermargate.com. This place is unbelievable. Not only is the food absolutely superb, the price is great too. They're renowned for their pizza and their gnocchi. They have all kinds of different things from mussels to roast pork and Italian fare. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, go and visit Saltwater Margate. You will not be disappointed. It is a place that I think at some point, if not already, there's going to be lines out the door and around the block. So if you're down on the shore, stop in, go to Saltwater Margate. At least check them out online at saltwatermargate.com. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Okay, per the usual, if you submit a question and I don't get to it, it's not because I don't want to answer it. Some things I just won't answer because either I know information about it and it's a better idea that I don't talk about it, or it's just the question has been asked so many times that I'm just not going to go over it. Okay, number one, who was the most dangerous boss between Albert Anastasia, and Carmine Galante? Of the two, who made more money? If you had to pick someone to work with, who would you have worked with? Anastasia, hands down on all three. First of all, I think that Galante probably made more money than Albert Anastasia. Let's be honest about that. But I think that Anastasia, I think, was the more dangerous of the two in terms of what he could have done, whereas Galante just as dangerous in that regard. But I think Anastasia was probably the most dangerous of the two. I think that Galante probably made more money than him. And if I had to work to either one of them, I'd move to Oklahoma and become a fucking farmer or some shit. I don't think I'd want to work for either one of them guys. They're crazy. All right. Anybody's buried in the Catskills? I've heard there are a few. You know what? Couldn't tell you, but one just has to logically assume that there's bodies in the Catskills. Good hiding place, I would assume, sort of like the Pine Barrens. So, yes. Do I know who's there? Absolutely not. All right. I've heard that Philadelphia is one of the safest cities. How true is that? Do you think it's because of the Philadelphia crew and how close they control their turf? If you're talking in terms of safety, Philadelphia could be a reckless fucking place. Listen, Philadelphia is not a fucking safe haven. It's not a fucking beach. It's not fucking Las Vegas. It's a dangerous place. The wrong place at the wrong time will get you fucking shot, and that's the truth. You just have to look at the murder rate in Philadelphia, if in and of itself. But do I think it's any safer because of the mafia or whatever? Yeah, it could be, depending on where you're at in the city and who you might know. Sure, that could protect you a little bit, but Ultimately, at the end of the day, if your number comes up, your number comes up. I don't think it really fucking matters at the end of the day who you fucking know. You step on the wrong toes, they're gonna get busted, and that's just the reality. Philadelphia is a very special place to me, and it's a tough town. It's not a town for fucking pussies, that's for sure. All right, is Boston really the most racist city in America? I don't know. I know that a lot of Boston is racist. I know they've said some stuff to some hockey players, PK Subban, and some stuff like that makes them racist. But are they the most racist? I don't really know. I couldn't tell you. There's probably some southern states that are completely worse than Boston is. But does Boston have sort of a racist contingent to it? Absolutely. All right, aside from the Kennedys, Richard Nixon also had some ties to the mafia as well. Yes, absolutely. Silver Dollar Sam Carolla and that crime family he was close with. Not Russell Buffalino, but Carlos Marcello he was very friendly with. So yes, Richard Nixon, Tricky Dick did have some connections. All right, what is your least favorite mob family in New York? Probably the Columbos. I don't really have a reason why. I just think that, that's probably the least covered family and probably my least favorite. All right, what's your opinion on Canada at the moment, and can you see any signs of things calming down? No, there's been 2 hits in like the last 3 weeks there. I don't see it calming down. You have the Rizzutos, what's left of the Catroni crime family. You have Ndrangheta, Camorra. You have all of these groups, regular Cosa Nostra. You got all these groups fighting over turf. I don't see that stopping. Someone is trying to take over complete control as long as the Rizzutos keep firing back. I don't see that stopping. I think the only way that it does kind of stop is there's got to be a massive sit down, and they need to go back to the principle of let's just make fucking money. If they go back to the principle of let's not make headlines and let's make money, they're going to be fine. But as long as they're still vying for turf, the cigarettes on the reservations, and all this crazy shit, you're going to continue to see murders. It's just going to continue to happen. It hasn't slowed down in 3 years. I don't think it is now. All right. Is it true that Cosa Nostra in Pittsburgh can no longer make new members due to the high-level defections in Pittsburgh and Youngstown as dictated by the Genovese crime family? To be honest with you, I don't know. I really don't know. Pittsburgh is a defunct city. There is nothing there that resembles the mafia in terms of what it was. Are there fringe guys? Are they there? Yes. Are they what they were? Absolutely not. You would probably see a bigger group in Cleveland or Youngstown than you would Pittsburgh these days. And would Genovese's have the final say on that? I don't know. I'm not in the mafia. I'm not on the board, the commission, so I don't really technically know. But I don't think it would necessarily have a whole lot to do with defections more than it would have to just be the fact that Pittsburgh has never been able to just continuously maintain control. Otherwise, they would still be there in huge numbers. All right, can you further explain the differences between Cosa Nostra versus Canadian Ndrangheta? It's my understanding that the later was based on post-World War II immigration. Okay, so some differences. Ndrangheta will kill judges. Ndrangheta will kill cops. Ndrangheta will not hesitate to kill, whereas American Cosa Nostra is a little different. They're not going to kill cops. They're not going to kill judges. Also, Ndrangheta is worldwide. They are not subjugated to just Canada. They are in Italy, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia. They are fucking everywhere. Huge numbers in Germany and France. They are a worldwide syndicate. They aren't just in Canada or in Italy. Also, Ndrangheta is very clannish. And when I say that is... specifically when you go over to Italy, you'll have little tiny subgroups here, a couple of dots on the map, whereas Ndrangheta has them all over the map, little subgroups fucking everywhere. And I hate to use this phrase. Think of it like a terrorist cell. The whole entirety of the cell itself is not in one location. There's pockets of it everywhere. And that is a big difference between the two. Ndrangheta can make a call and get a hit done in France, whereas probably American Cosa Nostra won't do that and may not have the power to do that. And those are the major differences. And it's not that one is lesser than the other, but one is 10 times the size of the other, and that's the truth. All right. Are you coming on the True Crime Podcast again for a chat? Yes, Scott, I am. Just let me know when. I'll be glad to come on and chat about serial killers or whatever it is you got going on, or the Flannagans or what have you. But absolutely, just let me know when, and I will definitely be on it. And if you have not listened to Scott's podcast, the True Crime Page podcast, you can go on Twitter, you'll see it. On Facebook, he talks about serial killers, murders, and stuff like that. It's a really smart show. It's a good show, one of my favorites that I listen to. All right, what do you think would have happened to Al Capone and Frank Nitti after Prohibition was over if Capone didn't go to jail? Do you think he would have been killed by the five families? No, I don't think he would have been killed. Al Capone's really height was during Prohibition. That's really what he had between that and the brothels and some drugs and some other things. But I don't think he would have been killed. I think ultimately Capone was pretty much rendered who he was in a very, very short period of time. You know, people think that Al Capone was this guy that ran the mafia for 30 fucking years. Capone's rise and fall was very short. The reason why he went to New York to Chicago was because he wanted to be a bigger fish in a small pond versus the opposite of that. Capone was not mafioso. Capone was a fucking gangster. There's a difference. All right, if you listen to Philly and Eddie's book and you read Ralph Natale's book, there are a lot of similarities. And my question for you is, from your perspective, how much of these books are being honest and truthful about how things went, and how much of it is just them covering their own ass? Well, first of all, they're rats. So, one, I wouldn't listen to Philly and Eddie's book. I wouldn't wipe my ass with his fucking book. That's number one. Number two, I wouldn't read anything Ralph Natale wrote down on a sheet of paper. That guy is completely and utterly full of shit, whereas Leonetti might have told one or two truths, but the majority of what he said was bullshit, too. I don't take any stock in what they have to say. I think you lose street credibility the minute you testify against other people. And look, Philly and Eddie didn't even do that from the jump. He waited till his little stupid fucking rat ass got hammered with a humongous sentence before he decided he wanted to talk. So the reality for me is that I think there might be an honest paragraph, usually the period or an exclamation point. That's about it. But I think most of it is just them trying to earn a buck, telling their own lopsided story of the mob. I don't think anybody takes them seriously, especially Ralph Natale. Fuck that guy. Toothless fucking Dracula vampire-looking motherfucker that he is. All right, with everything currently going on in the Maddie, Madonna, and Stephen Crea Jr. trial, it's sort of revealing a rivalry between factions in the Lucchese crime family. I've read that it's between Brooklyn and the Bronx. Can you explain where this rivalry comes from? No, I can't give you 100% details on that situation because only they truly know what's going on, but usually it's over money and power and ego. And the reason why I could tell you that is because the mob, this is what it is. The mob, if you're going to join the mafia, you want the power. You want the power, you want the money, you want the money, you want you want everything, right? The smart guys are the guys that don't need to be in power. They're happy and content making their money. They know that people won't fuck with them. That's what it is. Nobody goes into the mob because I just want to kill people. Nobody goes into the mob because they want to be powerful. It's all about money. And so any problem that you're ever going to have in any crime family is always going to go back to the same for three fucking things: money, power, and prestige. You take away those things, and if guys just centered and focused on making money and didn't pay attention to the ego involved, you wouldn't see this kind of stuff. But it's always going to go back to the same fucking three things. And somebody always thinks that they deserve to be somewhere else than where they're at, like your station in life. Oh, I don't want to be a secretary. I should be the VP. And that's what you get. And if you get two or three assholes that whisper in your fucking ear that you're Jesus and you start to believe that shit, you're going to start trying to fucking walk on water yourself. And that's how that happens. All right. I've seen over the years a lot of internal problems with the Bonanos, Colombos, and Lucchese'S, but the Gambinos and Genovese's seem to keep it sort of quieter and behind the scenes. Is this due to them being a little bit more crafty or just strict on who they bring in? And would you agree that the Genovese's should have remained called the Luciano crime family? Yes, that I agree with. I don't think Vito Genovese should have ever been able to make his family name the name of the family. It should have always stayed the Luciano crime family in homage and honor to Lucky Luciano and what he did. But, you know, Vito Genovese was a real egotistical prick, and he wasn't about to let that happen. So there you go with that. But as far as internal problems, you know, we just talked about an internal problem in the Lucchese's themselves. It's always the same thing. The reason why the Gambinos and Genovese's have less problems is because they make the most money. When you make the most money, you have less problems. The Genovese's and Gambinos controlled construction in this city, in New York City, for 30, 40, 50 fucking years. When there's money to be made, there's not a lot of gripes. When there's not money to be made, then there's a problem. And then you got to kind of look at, John Bonanno and his problem. You got to look at the Joe Colombo's issues and how he got his post. They're smaller in terms of maybe not so much the Bonannos and Lucchese'S, but the Colombos a little smaller in terms. But Colombos, don't get me wrong, Colombos are fucking ferocious. They will kill you. But I don't think it's necessarily being crafty. I just think that people are more content when they're making money. If you don't have a grievance or a gripe, then the machine just keeps going. It's like adding oil and gasoline to the machine. It just keeps going. When there's money problems and there's rat problems, then this is what you typically see. All right, do you think Russell Buffalino ever had any dealings with Nicky Scarfo after he took over as boss? Absolutely, unequivocally, 100%, absolutely fucking not. Russell Buffalino was not the kind of guy that was going to sit down and have a meeting with 10 guys. Russell Buffalino was a very low-key, very quiet gentleman, and that's just not what he was going to do. And Nicky Scarfo was a hot target because Nicky Scarfo believed in just killing fucking everybody. So there you go. All right. In your opinion, are the oaths they take now just a bunch of meaningful words with no action put to them? Or has it always been a sham to indenture people to others? This really depends on who you ask. There are guys that take that oath incredibly seriously and live 180 days like a gangster 24/7. There are others that take an oath and kind of roll their eyes to it. I think it just depends on the character of what's inside of you. If I was going to take an oath, it's like when you get married. You take an oath before God, the priest, whatever the fuck, to love, honor, cherish, sickness, and health, and all of this doodads and shit like that. And you got to mean that, right? Why else would you marry a broad if those were things you were not willing to fucking do? I know I wouldn't say something that I didn't mean. I know that if I'm going to take an oath to defend somebody, to be somebody, even if we want to break it down to more minuscule stuff, if I say to a friend of mine in Philadelphia, you're my friend, I honor you, you're a gentleman, whatever you need, I'll give you whatever problems you have, I will help. I have to honor that because my word is my bond. The minute that you fuck up your word or your bond, you got nothing. All you got in this world is your fucking word. So from my perspective, if you're going to get involved in the streets and you're going to take an oath, be serious about what you're doing. So is the oath, is it meaningful words? It should be. It should be. It was in the old days. It still should be today. But it's like everything else. Sometimes you allow people into a club or a group and they're not what they say. They're not who they say they are. And they end up becoming a rat or they end up creating drama, friction, and problems. And I think it comes down to each individual person. And I don't think it's a sham. I don't think that Italians brought that to this country with the idea of this not meaning anything. I just think times change. And egos change, and what people need changes. But to me, the oath is the oath. And if you take it, you better live by it, because if you don't live by it, you're going to get 2 in the head, and you fucking deserve it. I never felt, listen, and this is a horrible thing, and people jump on me all the time about this. I don't feel bad for people to get killed. I had a cousin of mine that got whacked, and that's true, and a lot of people know that story. Did I like it? No. Did it hurt me? Yes. But I also understand if you are going to get into the streets and you're going to play that game, those are the fucking results of not playing the game the right way. I cannot, I'm not justifying murder, and I'm not saying that it's a good thing somebody gets killed. I'm not saying any of that. So before some of you jump on me about that, it's just that you kind of lose an excuse to have a pity party and go, oh, my poor family member, he got killed, blah, blah, blah. He knew what he was doing when he got involved, right? Chances are people that get killed often involve themselves in other murders. So really, there's a justification. Live by the gun, die by the gun. Live by the sword, die by the sword. It's very true. So I don't feel bad when that happens. I feel bad for the families. But at the end of the day, if you're going to get on the train knowing you're going to fucking hell, just be prepared to get burned. And that's just the reality of it. All right. Favorite mob car that you would drive? You know what? Listen, I'm not that kind of guy. I would just drive a Mercedes. That's it. I don't need anything flashy, really. I'm a lot like my grandfather in this sense of I don't need a flashy shit. I don't need anything flashy. I just very low key. That's the way you should be. All right, what do you think of the Sopranos Comic-Con next week in New Jersey? Is it worth going? listen, if you like the show, it's worth going. You know, you can meet a lot of the actors and stuff like that. For me, I could give a shit less. I like The Sopranos like a lot of other people, but you got to understand it's TV. It's not real. A lot of people don't understand. When people would see Jimmy Gandolfini over in Tribeca or on the Upper West Side, they wouldn't even call him Jimmy. It would be not even Mr. Gandolfini. It'd be Tony. He could never escape that kind of bullshit. So as long as you know that the TV show is a good TV show, whatever, and you want to go hang out, get some merchandise, memorabilia, whatever, why not? Why not go? I wouldn't pay over $50. I'll tell you that fucking much. To sit with a bunch of grade B guys, no thank you. The only guy I would really want to hang out with is Tony Sirico, because he's a stand-up fucking guy. The rest of them, Michael Imperioli's a great actor, but the rest of them have done nothing but like fucking straight-to-DVD movies. So from my perspective, I wouldn't pay a lot of money to do it, to be honest with you. You know? All right. When you read about famous dons, it's always said how much they respected their wives. However, they usually openly cheated on them. My question is, when did it become so acceptable to do that? And does that practice or expose a flaw in the younger generation's personalities? So listen, there's a couple of ways that I can answer this. The first thing is like, a lot of the guys that I know, and when I say a lot of guys I know, I'm talking about New York. I'm not talking about Philly or Chicago or anybody else I know anybody. A lot of New York guys do that, okay? It's not a Philadelphia thing, to my knowledge. Listen, and I'm trying not to upset women when I say this, but here's this is the cleanest way that I can explain this to people without getting like really fucking vulgar. But it's like, I once sat with a guy, and I'll tell you what he said to me. I said to him, geez, you know, you got a beautiful wife at home, whatever. Why put yourself in this situation, have a girlfriend, get caught, get divorced? And he explained it to me. He says, my wife is the mother of my children. I'm not going to let the mother of my children blow me. I'm going to go to my girlfriend and let her do that. That's the mother of my children. Now, whether or not that's a realistic excuse to it is on him. But I know a lot of guys that do cheat on their wives, have cheated on their wives, and I know guys that would never do that. But I think with power comes ego, and I think that some guys, listen, they want to get their fuck on like everybody else. I can't blame them for doing that. And a lot of the wives, you also, with all due respect to the question, a lot of wives know this and they don't care. As long as their husband provides, he's a good father, he comes home every night, they don't care, they don't ask questions. It's a part of the lifestyle. Do I like it? Would I do it? Absolutely not. Just my personality is I'm a one-woman kind of guy. I've always been that way. I don't need to fucking dilly-dally here and there because when I'm with somebody, they're my world, right? So I don't need all that other shit. But to each their own. You know, guys are going to do what guys are going to do. I'm sure the women are like rolling their fucking eyes now. But is it acceptable? I think with some people it is. I think with some people it's not. I know that I can tell you from my perspective, my grandfather went fucking berserk and thought that any man that did that was just lower than dog shit. But that's his choice, and that's his perspective. He grew up in a different kind of world, a different kind of reality, and that's just it. So do I think it's disrespectful? I think it is a little bit, but that's not my choice. That's not my life. So I'm not going to chastise somebody for what they do. What they do in their personal life is their own goddamn business. I really don't give a fuck. But does it expose a flaw? Listen, I think, I don't know if this is a guy or girl that asked me this question. I believe it's a guy, but you have to ask yourself a question, right? And the question that I have to ask to you is, so if you had a girlfriend and you go to a bar and the hottest woman you've ever seen wants to go home with you, and for like 3 weeks straight, she keeps trying to push and push and push for you to go home with her. Eventually, you're either going to do one or two things. You're going to stop going to that bar or you're going to nail her. That's the truth. That's reality. So the question really becomes, what is it that you really want? I don't think that any of these guys that are doing that put too much effort into a gumata. I think it's just for one reason only. And so, you know, it just, look, it's whatever you want it to be, you know. Me, I don't live that kind of lifestyle, but that's just me. I'm different than a lot of people too, as everybody probably knows at this point. All right, now, earlier on Twitter, I said that there was a question that absolutely fucking infuriated me, and this is it. And for the person that asked the question, while I appreciate your question, it was a little insulting to me, and I don't think that you understand really how the world works. So I'm about to fucking explain it to you. And here's the question verbatim. And anybody wants to doubt that this question wasn't asked, I'll send you a screenshot. With all due respect, Why do you go on and on and on covering and saying good things about a rinky-dink, dinky little mob family like Philadelphia? Why not cover the big boys in New York? One, the fuck makes New York a big boy? That's number one. Number two, if you think that Philadelphia is a rinky-dink little nothing mafia family, then I want you who asked this fucking question to come with me to South Philly, and I want you to ask some people I may or may not know that question and see what happens. Everybody's a fucking tough guy and wants to say shit, but yet when reality gets in front of them, they shit their pants. And I think that this guy would probably shit his pants too. They're not fucking a rinky-dink little tiny mob family. I'm telling you that. I've been saying that. You cannot crumble something that's been together like fucking Kevlar for 30 fucking years. You think that you're going to go there and like say, oh, ha ha ha, you're not a real gangster, you're not from New York. Watch what happens. You're going to get the shit fucking slapped out of you over that. Just because they're not a 250, 300 member family doesn't make them rinky-dink, doesn't make them any less violent, doesn't make them a pussy, doesn't make them anything. In fact, in many ways, that makes them a hell of a lot stronger than a lot of other people. Because you can have 250 guys, some guys may not even fucking know each other. Manpower is one thing, and I understand that portion of it. But what you don't understand is you can have 250 guys, you got 250 egos. You put 100 in South Philly, 75 in South Philly, they've all known each other 30 fucking years. You're not going to step on their toes. You're not going to say nothing about one with the other not reacting. I can guarantee you that. So reality is that you can call it rinky-dink or whatever you want, but I guarantee you won't go down there and fucking say that shit to them. They're not rinky-dink. They're strong. They're strong. They're honest. They're honorable. They're loyal. And I'll even go one step further. If, God forbid, my life were on the line, I got their back all day long, just like I know they got mine. That's how much I believe in people I may or may not know there. That's just reality. So, big boys in New York, listen, New York's got an attitude. New York's got an ego. They've always had that. They think, in many ways, because of the sheer size of New York, there's a lot of different options for guys. But one thing you don't see, and I'm not throwing shade at New York, I'm just speaking honest, how many times you see rats coming out of Philly compared to New York? The Bonannos have, forget about it, 1 million fucking rats compared to Philadelphia. And every rat that ever comes out of Philadelphia is from the outside to the inside. It's never from the inside to the out. And what I mean by that is people that are hardcore entrenched in South Philadelphia don't rat. They don't rat. It's always the jerk-off they bring from the outside, and they trust too much that does the shit. That makes them stronger. Listen, I'm telling you, you think they're not violent, you're out of your fucking mind. You're out of your fucking mind. Guys in New York may take a little issue and be like, you know what, fucking who cares? Philly's a little bit different. They won't tolerate it. You know, I've always said, and I say to people that ask me, oh, what's South Philly like? I said, it's like walking into a fucking time zone, a time warp, 1960. That you wanna ever experience, at least from a visual perspective, the mafia in South Philadelphia. It's like walking back into 1960s New York. That's how they operate. That's how they are. And listen, while I respect the question, it's a dumb fucking question because I personally don't think you would have the balls to go down there and say that. And you obviously don't know anything about organized crime. Otherwise, you wouldn't even ask a question like that. So there you go. Go fuck yourself. All right. If you could have a crew of 7 non-Italian associates, who would they be? Oh, God. Dutch Schultz, Jimmy Burke, Frank Sheeran. Fuck yeah. Add him to the mix. Oh, boy. Really, I don't know. I can't think of fucking 7 non-Italian associates, like, off the top of my head right now. But those would be at least 4 that I would take. All right. Henry Hill said John Gotti killed Tommy, yet you say it was Jimmy Burke who did it. Do you think that Henry Hill was told by Jimmy that it was Gotti as a cover-up? I don't know for certain, but that would seem like the most logical thing. Look, a lot of people that love John Gotti are going to say that John Gotti did it. John Gotti didn't do shit. Had nothing to do with him. William Benvena, who was Billy Batts, was a part of the Gambinos. And the whole entire reason why he was killed was because when he went to prison, Jimmy Burke took over his rackets. Jimmy Burke made them profitable. When Billy Batts gets out of prison, he wants them back. Jimmy tells him, you're out of your fucking mind. So he goes and runs Tattletale. to try to get Jimmy in trouble, to force the Gambinos to give the rackets back, but nobody was going to fuck with Jimmy Burke. Jimmy Burke heard about it and said, fuck this, he's got to go, and he killed him. What Jimmy then did was sort of half-assed pinned it on Tommy. And nobody was going to go after Jimmy Burke. I'm telling you that right now. So anybody that tells you John Gotti did that is full of shit. They want John Gotti to do everything, but it wasn't John Gotti, it was Jimmy Burke. All right, what do you think is going to happen in Canada in the next few months? Murder after murder after murder after murder after murder. It's not going to stop. And you're probably going to see a big indictment there because I think the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are a bit tired of the bullshit that's going on there. All right, who was a better overall boss? Carlo Gambino, Angelo Bruno, or Joe Batters? I'm going to say Carlo Gambino. Absolutely hands down. All right, why don't you do things about cartels in Mexico and Colombia? One, because I like my head attached to my body. In reality, it's because I don't know a lot about cartels. I mean, I know the basics like a lot of other people. That just doesn't interest me. Cartels are highly organized, highly violent, highly dangerous. I find the subject material interesting, but it's just kind of not my thing. I may eventually sort of go that way a little bit, but I prefer to talk about things that I know, and these are things that I know probably what everyone else does. I am doing a lot of research on El Chapo and some other people and stuff like that, but it's just because I don't know enough about it to speak educationally about it anyway. So if I knew more about it, then I probably wouldn't hesitate to discuss it. But we are going to kind of get into some of that and some biker stuff in the next couple of weeks. All right, why is that guy Schratweiser such a fuckboy? All right, if you're not from New York, maybe you don't know what a fuckboy is. If so, look it up on Urban Dictionary. You'll find out what fuckboy is, and there's a whole bunch of other phrases that are really fucking mind-blowing on Urban Dictionary. Why is Schratweiser a fuckboy? I think Dave has tendencies. I've said this before. He continues to post photos with Joey Merlino nonstop, like the guy's got a fucking crush. It's a little disgusting to me. I know that somebody sort of went after Dave and said, oh, is that your crush? And he's like, no, it's not a crush. But you know what? I'm starting to believe it is. If Dave has tendencies like that, to each his own. But I just think he has an obsession with Joey Merlino that's probably very unhealthy. I mean, granted, I got a painting of Joey in my house, right? But any letter I got from Joey from prison from 14 years ago, I don't have no more. Save it, trash it. I don't put them in frames and put hearts around them. I don't hold George Anastasia's fucking hand, whistling a love song underneath the trees, thinking about, oh, I wonder if Joey's getting a fucking tan. I wonder if Joey's lifting weights in the prison yard. I wonder if he quit smoking. These are things I don't concern myself with because I don't give a fuck. Joey's a great guy, a stand-up guy. I like him a lot. I always have. But I sort of draw a line at putting hearts and fantasizing about him because to me that's a little fucking disturbing. But if Dave just likes Joey and has a little crush, I don't know what to tell you. But I think I'm not the only one that's sort of starting to realize that. He drools when he sees Joey. So somebody get him a fucking bib already, huh? All right, what's your opinion on Sonny Franzese? I love Sonny Franzese. Old-timer, stand-up guy, didn't fuck around, didn't rat nobody out. He's a fucking man. If you want to look at the fucking the archetype or the character for what a man is, he's a fucking man. That guy did a ton of fucking time, never said a word. It was involved in some of the most notorious fucking things ever to happen in the mob. I love Sonny. I could never say anything bad about him. His kids, they can go fuck themselves, especially Michael, because he's a fucking rat. All right, you said black, oh my God, here we go. You said black gangs ain't nothing to worry about, but what would happen in Larry Hoover and the gangster disciples declared war on the mafia? One, I don't know who the fuck Larry Hoover is. Does he sell vacuum cleaners? I don't know who the fuck Larry Hoover is. That tells you how much I give a fuck about black gangs. I'll be really honest with you. Listen, I grew up in neighborhoods with the Crips, the Latin Kings, the Bloods. I've seen them all, okay? Are they men? Yeah, absolutely. Are they dangerous? Absolutely. Are they organized? Better than they were. But at the end of the day, gangster disciples going to declare war on the mafia would kill them in a millisecond. Because you're not just fighting Philly, you're fighting Philly, Jersey, New York, fucking Rhode Island, Massachusetts. You're taking on the whole entire mafia, they're not going to have a chance. And I never said that black gangs were nothing to fucking worry about. Because 2 years ago, I about got shot between a turf war between the Bloods and the Crips. Bullets were whizzing over my head. You don't want to believe that. I'll send you the fucking news story, and you'll see me on the fucking security camera in New York running with bullets flying all over my head. Then you see the aftermath with blood all over my face and my fucking coat. So don't tell me that they're not fucking dangerous, and don't tell me that I said that they were nothing to worry about, because I almost got fucking killed. So don't put words in my motherfucking mouth. That's number one. Number two, I don't give a fuck about the gangster disciples. It's organized crime, okay? There's a difference between ethnic street gangs and organized crime. That's just the truth. I'm not trying to slight nobody. I'm not trying to say that African-American gangs are not tough, because they are. They're nobody you want to fuck with, but I never said not to worry about them. So don't put fucking words in my mouth, or perhaps go find a fucking little chat room where you could talk about that shit, because I'm not going to talk about it on my show. All right, Anthony Comella has allegedly HIV from a stripper. What do you think about that? For those of you who don't know who Anthony Comello is, he is the one that shot and killed Frank Cali. There is so much wild shit that's coming out about Anthony Comello. I really don't know what to believe. He sat down twice and gave multiple interrogation interviews with the FBI, and he changed his story a dozen times. At first, he tried to blame the Gambino crime family, saying they hired him. Then he blamed Trump. Then he's pulled this MAGA bullshit. It's so stupid, everything this kid is saying. The kid's a fucking nut job. He's a fucking maniac. And this is only going to end one way from... with the question. So apparently he was afraid that Frank Cali was tried to basically extort him by saying he was going to tell everybody he had AIDS from a stripper. That's why he killed Cali. He killed Cali because he wanted to bang Cali's fucking niece. Cali wasn't having anything to do with it. Cali knew he was a fucking scumbag and a jerk-off. And unfortunately... for Francesco, he wasn't smart enough to realize what was going on right in front of him. This kid's going to get killed. This kid ain't going to suicide himself. He's going to get killed in prison. And you know what? He's got whatever the fuck is coming to him. Because he's a punk, he's a bitch, and he's going to get it. He's going to get it in prison. And I'm sort of excited to see how that plays out, because it's deserved. Because Cali did nothing to this kid. He was protecting his fucking niece. And this fucking maniac's going to get a gun and try to act all Joe Pesci. Believe me, he knows what's coming for him in prison, and the quicker that expedites itself, the better off I'll be. I don't feel bad for him. I don't feel bad for his family. Fuck him. Fuck him in the ass.
In which Joe Bonanno was helping. No, everybody's watching this epic show. It's total nonsense. It's total bullshit. It's all lies. Do you really think that Bumpy Johnson was going to tell Chin go fuck himself? What do you think would have really happened as a result of that? Don't believe everything you fucking see on TV and read. That's the best way I can answer that. All right. Why did Tony Provenzano not show up at the sit-down with Hoffa and Frank Sheeran? The reason why is because Tony Provenzano knew that Jimmy Hoffa was going to get killed, and so he stayed away. He was ordered to stay away. That's number one. Second part of this question is, why would they have Hoffa's son involved in Hoffa's murder as portrayed in the film? I don't know why they did that in The Irishman, and that's one of the problems that I had with the film, is that A, that never fucking happened. B, the mob would have never taken Hoffa's son to a murder house. That's just Hollywood making it somewhat more epic. I don't know why they did it. There were a lot of liberties that they took with this film in general that I didn't like. It was a great film. Don't get me wrong. But I just think at the end of the day here, it just,
So, I mean, it goes without saying, they took several liberties with the film, and, it is sort of what it is. Okay. In your opinion, who was the most powerful boss in Cosa Nostra history, American-wise? That's probably going to be Carlo Gambino at this point. I think Gambino or maybe Vincent the Chin Gigante, but I think realistically probably Carlo Gambino. All right, what would have happened if Dutch Schultz whacked Thomas Dewey? Would Luciano still have been sent to prison and deported? I think ultimately they still would have gone after Luciano regardless of what happened. That sort of expedited it. Dutch Schultz got whacked because he wanted to kill Thomas Dewey. That was really why Dutch Schultz met his end. The mob took control and stopped that immediately. But I don't think Luciano would have been saved by that issue in and of itself. I think ultimately Dewey still would have gone after Luciano in the end. Okay, what's the difference between made men in New York versus Philadelphia? Nothing. A made guy is a made guy. I think I got to be careful how I answer this one. I don't think there's much of a difference, to be honest with you. Like I said, made guy is a made guy, but I think Philadelphia, I think everybody is tough there. I think you may have some guys in New York that are just simply earners, but I think in Philly they're all earners and they're all violent, or can be when they need to be. And I think that's sort of the difference. Of all the cooperating witnesses in the world, who do you think was the one who was not the most full of shit? Probably Sammy Gravano. He's still a rat. He's still a fucking liar, a dog, a rat, a piece of shit. But I think of all the ones I've ever seen come forward, I think that he's probably he's still not credible, but I think, did he tell more truths than some other people? Absolutely. Absolutely. What is your take on guys switching sides of a family during a mob war? Listen, Carmine Persico, he's called the Snake for a reason. He was probably the most famous for doing that, and I think a lot of it is guys switch because there's money involved. If a guy is earning but so much with this guy, and there's another guy vying for power, and he thinks he could climb the ladder quicker, or if he does certain things, he'll get a higher stature in that crime family. That's why he'll do it. I don't think it's a matter of a guy liking one guy versus another guy. I think it just comes down to the bottom line, which is usually money and power. That's the truth. All right, do you believe Dana White was really shaken down by Whitey Bulger and then he leaves Boston to head to Vegas because he was fearful of Bulger? Absolutely. I don't think Dana White would make that statement if it wasn't true. I'm not a big fan of Dana White by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe him when he said that Whitey Bulger tried shaking him down and he said, fuck this, and got out of Boston as a result. Absolutely, unequivocally, 100% believe that. All right, who's your favorite mobster and why? Who's the biggest gangster of all time? Listen, we can rank gangsters from A to B basically on how dangerous they were, how much money they made. For my money, I think, in my personal opinion, Tony Salerno, just because of the sheer amount of volume and money and the things he could get done. And then there's Carlo Gambino for his power and what he could have done. Carlo Gambino ran the whole entire Eastern Seaboard. He could shut down the ports if he wanted to. That makes him a fucking straight gangster. Tony Salerno as well, Vinny the Chin, big-time gangsters. If I was going to formulate it on money, murder, mayhem, it's kind of a tough choice because there's so many. But I do think that Tony Salerno, hands down, was one of the most incredible earners I've ever seen in my life. And he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty either. But if we were going to talk about sheer violence, I think Albert Anastasia. But my favorite gangster, I have a couple. But I think really Tony Salerno and Vinny the Chin are my two favorites for a lot of different reasons. Basically, Vinny the Chin was able to evade, being arrested for 30 fucking years. I think that Tony Salerno, just his sheer ability to earn money and just keep the system going, I marvel at stuff like that. So there you go. Who's stronger today, the American Mafia or the Canadian? Well, I would have to say Canadian, and I say that because it's Ndrangheta. Ndrangheta is worldwide, not just sort of pocketed into one location. But if they were to have a war, there's no telling. But obviously, I think that you also have to understand, too, like if we talk in terms of New York City, New York crime families have inroads to Ndrangheta, inroads to Italy. And so, who knows? But I think ultimately, if you were going to compare the American Mafia to Ndrangheta, that's, I think, hands down Ndrangheta. But if we were going to say the guys that are in Canada versus New York, no way it's going to happen. New York would eat them alive because New York would also include Philly and Chicago. In Florida, they would, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, they would eat the fucking Canadians alive. All right, is Tony No-No still the boss in Chicago? I don't know. You should I do know, actually. But I'm not going to. I'll just say it like this: the Falcon is the boss in Chicago. His name is Anthony, but his nickname is the Falcon. He's the guy who's in charge in Chicago. All right, you seem to know a lot of people. Who's the most psychopathic of those you know, have known, met, talked to, or whatever? Top three: Anthony Center, Sally Catone, who nobody would know of anyway, and Tommy Patera. Those would be the three. All right, who's the toughest guy in Philadelphia if you had to pick one? Toughness in terms of with his fists or just nature or character. I could pick 20 guys in Philadelphia. If I had to pick one, I could pick one of several. Boy, I really don't want to say names here. But if I had to go out on a limb and say it like this, allegedly, according to what the FBI says, according to what other people say, I think Sonny Mazzone is one of the toughest guys I've ever met. He's a no-nonsense guy, but he's a nice guy. You would really have to put yourself in a shitty position with somebody or hurt somebody you cared about in order for him to react. I think George Borghesi's a very tough individual. But listen, these are all allegations about people, and you never know what's really true and what isn't. But there's a lot of guys in Philly that are tough. Philly is not a soft town. There's not a soft person in Philadelphia. That's just kind of how I see it. All right, do you logically think the FBI is going to leave Joey Merlino alone, or are they hell-bent on putting him away for the rest of his life? Listen, they're hell-bent on getting headlines, right? So they're going to go after Joey Merlino for all they're worth. I think it's a mistake. I think they ought to just leave Joey alone. The best they could do is get a stupid gambling charge on him. They will have you believe that Joey Merlino is the Pied Piper of the Mafia. And the reality is that Joey is not the guy that the headlines want you to think he is. He's not the guy that the FBI wants to tell you he is. He is who he is. I don't think Joey makes any sort of I don't think he pretends for 1 second that he's a banker. You know what I'm saying? But I think at the end of the day, they're not going to leave him alone. They're not. They're not going to rest until they put him away. And they're not going to put him away because the guy's not doing nothing. They've tried for 30 fucking years to do this, and they haven't succeeded really once. So there you have it. All right. I heard John Vesey lives in Michigan. If you were in Michigan and you knew where he lived, would you stop over at his house for a cup of coffee, and would you take a bat, a gun, or a knife? First of all, I wouldn't go near that prick. I've also heard that he is in Michigan. People talk. Would I go near him? Nah, not for a minute. But if I had to have an introduction with him, I'd probably take a gun, and that pretty quick. But no, I wouldn't go near the guy. The guy's a rat. He's a scumbag, a fucking garbage pail piece of shit. I wouldn't have nothing to do with him. All right. I seen where John Vesey was stalking Chang's wife, laying out threats, saying all kinds of crazy shit. Is it me, or is he just unstable as fuck, or is he looking for two in the head? In my opinion, I think the guy's a fucking garbage, junk pile, jerk-off, junkie piece of shit. Listen, it doesn't take much balls to go to Philadelphia and take a photo of your middle finger up looking at a cab stand or a fucking newspaper stand and run your fucking mouth, especially when the FBI is protecting you and George Anastasia is protecting you. That's the reality of it. You don't have balls when you can stand there, you can make prank phone calls and do all this crazy shit to somebody's wife who had nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. He wants to lay claims that Chang did this, Chang did that, whatever. But it doesn't take balls to, shoot your mouth off when the FBI protects you like a bitch. And that's the truth. And I don't give a fuck about John Vesey. I don't give a fuck if he listens to this. I don't give a fuck if he wants to prank call me. Because he's a gutless coward bitch, and that's the way he always will be. He's a fucking rat, nothing fucking more. The mistake was these guys didn't end it. Somehow this guy lived. I will never understand that. All right. This last question is about Phil Narducci, and I'm just not going to answer it because there's no point in me answering that. All right, so with that, those are all the questions for today. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to get into the Kennedy show.
And now, Mob Talk Radio breaking news.
And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Just coming across the desk, it is a guilty verdict for Stephen Crea, Terrence Caldwell, Londonio, and Madonna. If you're unsure about what I'm talking about, obviously we're talking about the Lucchese case, which has been going on in Westchester County. Guilty verdict, not good. The only not guilty verdict, the only acquittal in this case was Londonio's breaking out of jail scheme. That is the only thing out of the indictment that was considered or at least found to be not guilty. And that's not good news for Stephen Crea and the rest of the group. The major crime that they were convicted of that is going to give them a life sentence, if and when the judge imposes his sentence, is going to be for the murder of former Purple Gang member Michael Meldish. According to the feds, the federal government anyway, Meldish's crew pretty much did the dirty work for the Lucchese crime family, the Genovese crime family, and the Bonanno crime family. During the trial, the government and the informants in this case alleged that Michael Meldish was whacked over refusing to repay a debt to Madonna, who at the time allegedly was the acting boss of the Lucchese crime family. Now, once again, we see this testimony really is coming from informants. There were two specifically that gave information on this case, which I find fucking repulsive. One of those is Sean Richards, who was the former rat who ratted out John Riggy. He was the former son-in-law of John Riggy, put John Riggy behind bars. He also was best friends with another rat who I will not mention on this show. Both of these gentlemen, scumbag fucks, gave information to the federal government about these guys. And the thing about it is, was that information the sum total of why they got convicted? Absolutely not. But it didn't help either. Why the government used either one of these two pukes is beyond my understanding. Sean Richards is a low-life scumbag piece of shit, and his little buddy is a piece of shit as well. Neither one of them really could be counted on to save a fucking cat out of a burning house. It's a joke. It's fucking retarded. Early on in this case, I was contacted by Stephen Crea and Madonna's attorney. I don't know if that attorney was the one who finished off with the sort of defense in this case, but I was contacted early on by the attorney in this situation to ask me a couple of questions about some things that the feds were alleging, which were total lies. And one of those was two informants living together, committing crimes together under the FBI's watch. And that is certifiably true. What the FBI was trying to allege was that these two rats were living next door to each other and that the feds had no clue. It's a total fucking lie. It's another lie spun by Ted Otto, who's a fucking vile pig FBI agent, former FBI agent, scumbag, complete and utter scumbag. But that was the thing that the feds were alleging, is that they didn't know these two were living together and doing stuff together, and it's bullshit. They knew. If I knew and we had evidence that they were living together and next door to each other and doing things together business-wise, if I knew that and 20 other people knew that and we had evidence that they were doing that, then therefore anything that those two vile fucks had to say should have been thrown out of court. Like I said, I don't think what these two fucking pukes said had much to really do with the case itself, but obviously they gave information which the feds used in some type of way. So it's pretty fucking disgusting. I don't like the fact that these guys were found guilty of stuff, obviously, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. But I'll be really honest about this. The fact that these two mutts were allowed to even talk to the FBI or even allowed to give information, which I personally find hilarious, is pretty repulsive. There was sort of a subtext to this that, according to the FBI, there was a situation where Sean Richards was going to get whacked. They were looking to kill him. But it didn't really have to do with this case. It's with another case. But I find that funny because that rat at the time was not living upstate. He was living in New Jersey right next to his little other rat informant boyfriend. Therefore, I think any validity that the FBI has in saying that these two were not working complicit together, these two were not living next door to each other, is a fucking lie. We had videotape evidence of it, photographic evidence of it. So I don't know specifically, obviously, because I was never asked to testify in this case. I was never asked to do anything more than to just validate what they already knew. And that's what myself and other people did, was we validated the information that the defense had. Unfortunately, I don't think it really helped much because anytime you stack the deck with rats, this is what happens. But in final, according to the government, Madonna allegedly handed the order down to Stephen Crea, who then sort of recruits Londonio, who also gets Terrence Caldwell involved, who was an alleged associate for the hit. All four were found guilty of fraud, extortion, and murder. All four are facing mandatory life sentence for murder in aid of racketeering. Anytime you get murder in aid of racketeering, it's an automatic life sentence. We're hoping that there is at least an appeal process, but that's pretty much how it goes. 15 other people that were indicted in this particular case already pled out. So that's what we know as far as that case goes. We'll see how it moves along in the penalty phase of this trial. If I had an opinion, I think it's garbage. I think it's bullshit. I think, and I'm going to tell you something from the street perspective here. Anybody that tells you Madonna was involved in that hit isn't telling you the truth. Anybody that tells you Stephen Crea or Terrence Caldwell or Londonio were involved in this is a joke. All you have to do is have your fucking ear to the pulse of the streets. I do. And the word is that this was done not because Meldish didn't repay a debt, not because he was talking subversive about somebody else, not because he told Madonna to fuck off. There are other things that are in play, that were in play at the time. None of these guys had anything to do with this fucking murder. This is once again the feds pinning it on four guys they wanted to put away. Because the pulse in the street, and when I say that, what I mean to you is what criminals are saying. What people say on the streets is that these guys are taking it in the ass. I can't really say it any better way, but that these guys are taking it in the ass for something somebody else did, and because they were interconnected, this is why it happened. And all you got to do is give a rat a fucking slice of cheese. They're going to walk in and say whatever the FBI wants them to say, and that's exactly what happened in this case. Listen, I can't argue fraud. I can't argue extortion. I can't argue any of that stuff. But if I know that these guys were not involved in that particular murder, because when you hear guys talk on the streets, they're all saying, these guys didn't do that. This was so-and-so, or we heard this was so-and-so. The streets knows better than the feds. So here we are once again seeing the feds doubling down on rats, using them to get what they want, using two fucking disgraceful fucking pukes to provide information who are living next door to each other, committing crimes together. It's revolting. It's revolting in every sense. But it is what it is. And as this penalty phase moves forward, we will cover more on that. Hopefully somewhere down the pike there is some sort of appeal, and we'll see how that goes. But once again, here we go. All right, so a little bit of other news before we get to the Kennedys. The Flannagans will remain. The Flannagans will begin shooting again in 2 weeks. We've got a couple things to finish, a couple reshoots to do. We're going to do that. And then we're hoping that it'll be done sometime in late January, early February. How we're going to debut that, what we're going to do with it after that, I really can't talk about. I just kind of got to keep that under wraps. But yeah, we will be looking for like some extras and stuff like that still. This is a long process. Nothing is solved in a day. And in case people don't understand, because a lot of people have been asking me, why does it take so long? In an average scene, you have, first of all, you got to know your dialogue, right? So if you know your dialogue, you also have cues. You got to be standing in the right place. You got to block right. Blocking is just simply where you're going to stand, where the camera can pick you up. Then you have to do close-ups. 2 shots, 3 shots of close-ups, reactions, and stuff like that. So an average scene takes, depending on how long the dialogue is, 10 to 12 hours to shoot. Sometimes you get it done in a couple of shots and everything looks good. Sometimes you want to move it around and change the way things look. So this is the process. I think a lot of people who have never been around film or how TV operates is they think it's just, oh, you set up the cameras, you do your dialogue, and you're done. And it's not. There's things where you want to change the dialogue, or you know what, let's move this guy here, move him over there. Let's change the way that the scene is going to flow. Let's change what he says here because I think it might be better. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and it's take after take after take after take after take. So they're long and exhaustive days. Nothing is solved or done very quickly. I think looking back at what we have done thus far, which is 95% of the show, I think the shortest scene was 3.5, 4 hours, and that could be a scene with 4 lines. So that's the process. The process is long-winded, and I think that some of the guys that hadn't really done stuff before, who were absolutely great, were not prepared or just didn't realize they were going to show up and just be like sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. And so in between takes, while the cinematographer is setting up the new shots, we sit around, we drink coffee, we bullshit, and then it's go time. So it's a long process. Most production companies that do a pilot episode shoot 14-hour days, 8 or 9 days in a row. And that's just not the way we wanted to do things. We just wanted to shoot the bulk of it and then take a big break and then come back and finish up what we had to finish up. So that's what's going on with that. Also, you can get the Flanagan's t-shirts at omertamia.com. Type in Mob Talk in all caps into the code section. You can get 20% off your total purchase. You can get your Stop Glorifying Rats, Intimidate All Witnesses, hats, shirts, pins, you name it. Even socks. Their socks are fucking great. I got a bunch of their socks. So, all that being said, head over there. You can get your Flanagan's t-shirts. They have them in stock. You can get 20% off your total purchase by typing in Mob Talk in all caps in the code section, and that is omertamia.com. The other thing is, I wanted to thank everybody who continues to donate to my channel. What this enables us to do is get upgrades, go to locations like Chicago and some other places to do some big-time interviews, which we want to do. Unfortunately, when you look at it in terms of the donations, listen, I'm not getting rich off of this. Anybody that donates $1, $5, $10, $100, whatever it is, I'm not going to hold a gun to your head. I appreciate it 100%, and I appreciate those that continuously donate. What is frustrating about it is that I do this show for free. I don't get paid to do this. I think a lot of people that think I'm making a lot of money off this, they're crazy. I'm not making a dime. So when we're asking for donations, all the money just gets dumped right back into the show. It's incredibly hard to take, half of your week to do a show and then just be at the point where if you need an upgrade, you've got to do a million different things to do it to get the shows out. We're also going to start doing some live shows with some call-ins, which is going to enable all the fucking haters, the pukes, the jerk-offs, and the scumbags to say what they want to me. I don't know how bright it is, but we're going to do that. We also have some guests coming on the show that are lined up, and we got a lot of things coming. The month of December is going to be a busy one for us. We are going to try as hard as we can to get out the minimum of 10 shows over Christmas holidays, and that's just the way we're going to roll. It's all about getting as much out as we can. So all that being said, anybody that continues to donate, we really appreciate it. Every little nickel and dime and penny helps, and that's where it's at. Also, one final thing before we get to the Kennedys. Damian Trites. If you don't know who Damian Trites is, he's a buddy of mine. He is also in the Flannagans, plays a character by the name of Tommy Leary, is stepping into the octagon one last time at age 40, which is miraculous. Damian is a former MMA fighter, and he has decided he wants to fight one more time, and he will do so at Twin Rivers Casino in Rhode Island, I believe January 23rd. I could be wrong about the date. But Damian is looking for a couple of fight sponsorships. Every little nickel and dime helps there. I will provide a link in the show today. I think it's going to be a good fight, and I've never seen Damian fight other than old footage because Damian's been out of MMA for a minute. But at 40 years old, he is going to walk down that aisle into the octagon one more time, and we're proud of Damian, and it takes a lot of moxie and balls at 40 to do this. And Damian's simply looking for a little bit of help for fight camp. It's not a lot of money, $5, $10 here. Anything you guys can give, even if it's $1, will help him towards his final goal, and that's what we're going to do. And I will put links in the description box of this radio show. Now, all that being said, here's what we got left. We're going to cover the first part of the Kennedys. There's going to be a lot of background information on Joe Kennedy, obviously, because we have to set ourselves up. Anybody that's looking for a biographical timeline is not going to get this. It's going to be a little bit all over the place, just being honest, straight up about it ahead of time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come with part 2 later on this week, which is going to cover a lot of the conspiracy theories. We're going to talk about Oswald. We're going to talk about Sirhan, and just sort of the things that were going on with the government and the mafia in general to wrap it up. So what we're going to do is cover the first part as best we can. Once again, if you want to follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7, the Flannagans is on Facebook. Just type in the Flannagans TV show. We're over on Instagram as well, Mob Talk and the Flannagans. Anybody who submitted a question, if I didn't get to it today, we'll get to it next week. You can also submit those questions over at either Facebook or Twitter. All right, so with all that being said, we are going to get into the Kennedys. But before we get too far into it, we have to establish a few things. We need to understand how the Kennedys got into the position that they were to begin with. You have to know where they began. While I would love to sit here and do a 4.5 hour on the subject, we just can't do that. So we're going to cover some major areas in a timely fashion, as quick as I can anyway. The first is how the Kennedys came into the money that they did. They did not get their money legitimately. Anybody that tells you that they were saints and they got their money completely legitimately is lying to you. There are pros and cons to this. A lot of authors and a lot of historians will tell you they earned it the hard way. But I tend to not agree with them. I think there are a lot of things that are out there, especially declassified paperwork, other books who other authors have uncovered the dirty deeds of the Kennedys. And I think that history with karma, especially, and what's happened to that family, karma's a bitch. And we see karma kind of comes full face. Then we have to kind of cover how John F. Kennedy got elected. And that's really, really important because that is what plays out further down the road with the Kennedys. We have to figure out the reasons for the trouble that Kennedy had in office and the trouble outside of it. And then there's the finality of all of that. Those are the major areas. So look, if you're looking for a 5-hour in-depth ABCDE biography on the Kennedys, that's not what you're going to get here. You're going to get pretty much the meat and the potatoes of what we need to talk about. So as far as Joe Kennedy goes, this is a lot. It's clear. Listen, some people are going to disagree with what I have to say, but everything that I'm about to tell you is absolutely factual, been backed up with paperwork. So if you don't believe me, ask me for the paperwork. I'll send you links and you can see it for yourself. Joe Kennedy got his start after graduating from Harvard as sort of a position as a bank examiner. In 1913, at the age of 24, he ends up going to work for Columbia Trust Bank. And this is going to be very important because if you end up controlling banks, you end up controlling the money and you end up doing nefarious things. And this is how Kennedy really got his start. You need to understand that Joe Kennedy's parents were very wealthy to begin with. So the Kennedys did not start off poor. They started off wealthy to begin with. But what Joe Kennedy was able to do is pretty miraculous. Anyway, Joe Kennedy's father was a major bank shareholder of Columbia Trust Bank, and his father was having problems with the bank, and the bank was sort of going under. And the other shareholders were pretty much at the time trying to oust Joe Kennedy's dad. And what Joe Kennedy is able to do at a young age is he was able to borrow $1 million. In money from alleged family and friends, and they would buy back control of the bank. Now, $1 million was not the fee in those days. I think it was like $45,000, $50,000. But it translates with inflation to over $1 million. The fact that a 24-year-old is able to borrow $1 million from alleged friends and family to buy back control of the bank is pretty big. As a reward for saving the bank ends up making him the bank president, which also sort of makes him the youngest bank president in the history of bank presidents. It's long been asserted that Kennedy was really the guy who gave the mob loans. Now, I can't exactly give you a link to that. These are things that I've heard. These are things that have been talked about in a lot of books. But one of the things that Kennedy was able to do was bankroll some stuff. He's got control of the banks. He can do what he wants. Remember, this is before the Teamsters. This is before all of that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Well, none of these things can be proven 100%, but when you consider the Kennedys already had a wealthy standing to begin with, it's really not too far. It's not too much of a stretch to believe that he likely did some things. There is some illegality here that he got involved in, and we're going to talk about that. But as a result of becoming the bank president of Columbia Trust Bank, he then goes and buys Old Colony Realty Association, which was considered distressed real estate. And what he would do is buy these sort of rundown realty corporations, and then he would turn around and sell them for a huge profit. You see a lot of people doing that today, where they call it rehabbing. You go in, you buy a distressed house, you fix it up, you sell it, you flip it. This is essentially what he was doing at the time. Now, is this illegal? No, but when you're a bank president and you're using the money of the bank to do that, that is illegal, and that's what he did. During World War I, Joe Kennedy was in a partnership with J.P. Morgan and Bernard Baruch, who owned the Intercontinental Rubber Company. President Woodrow Wilson at the time asked J.P. Morgan and Baruch and Kennedy to grow I cannot pronounce this fucking word, Gaeul, which basically is a substance that comes from a plant which is used to make latex and in turn can be made into rubber. The main reason for Wilson going to them was that there was a general fear that Germany may blockade rubber shipments from Asia. So Intercontinental would then establish the Intercontinental Farm just outside of Arizona for rubber manufacturing. However, the farm would be sold 3 years later to Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who ended up using that farm to grow cotton. So at an early age, Kennedy is using bank funds to buy property and establish corporations and stuff like that. Once again, this is fucking illegal. In 1919, Kennedy would join a stock firm called Hayden Stone and Company, which he allegedly becomes an expert in dealing with unregulated stocks. In other words, it's insider trading. But here's the thing. This is before there was such a thing considered. There was no such thing considered as insider trading at the time, but that's exactly what he did. Sort of the thing that Martha Stewart was convicted of. Was it illegal? Yes, highly illegal in today's time period, but then it wasn't. And it simply was a pump and dump scheme. Buy stocks low, sell them high. He knew information about how the stocks would play out, and so he begins to make a ton of money. And he would also manipulate the market. And like I said, insider trading, and he would make himself and others around him very, very wealthy, in fact, becoming a multimillionaire. But it wasn't just from stocks. With access to funds from various different banks, including Columbia Trust Bank, he would begin bankrolling bootlegging operations, and then he goes into business with Frank Costello, of all people. So the idea that Joe Kennedy made an honest living, sure, in part he did, but at the same time, he dealt with the fringe of organized crime constantly through his whole entire life, and he uses bank money to bankroll bootleg operations. The problem Costello, Meyer Lansky, and others were having at the time was controlling the ports and shipyards. Because Kennedy was tight with Delano Roosevelt, who at the time, Roosevelt was the Secretary of the Navy, and he had access and control of the shipyards completely. The mob needed a backdoor guy at the time to help them get ships into the port without obstruction, without investigation. And that's where Joe Kennedy kind of comes in. It's because of his relationship with Delano Roosevelt that helped Kennedy get the shipping ports, get the drugs in, and yes, we're going to talk about drugs and the liquor, and it also helps the mob. And the mob also needed liquid cash. The mafia at the time did not have, they had enough cash, but not the kind of cash that they could help for the shipyards and the Secretary of the Navy to walk away and not look at what was going on. And that's where Kennedy also stepped in. Kennedy would go on to help finance rum operations. Kennedy would use his contacts and would help smuggle liquor in through Sag Harbor and Long Island. Anybody that wants to doubt me there, I got some documents you're not going to believe. Kennedy had the routes from Canada into the United States via Boston to New York. When I say I have documents, what I mean is I have Coast Guard records which directly show that Joe Kennedy was under suspicion of using boating lanes and shipping lanes via Boston to New York for the purpose of bringing in rum and liquors. Several ships under Kennedy's ownership were seized with liquor on board, many of those coming out of Nantucket Sound, which, if you know Nantucket Sound, that is really the hub of the Kennedy's compound to begin with. Aboard those boats or ships, they found nautical charts showing liquor drops for Hyannisport. Now, what Kennedy could argue, and what he did argue, was that he was bringing in liquor for medicinal purposes, and the fact that they were being dropped off in Hyannisport, right there next to the Kennedy compound, sort of made the Coast Guard sort of look away. The fact that he was friends with Delano Roosevelt also helped him sort of get away with that. But the fact is, he was bootlegging. He fronted the cash for the mob to start the bootlegging for a lot of mobsters, and that's the truth. Now, while liquor was illegal, like I said, at the time, Kennedy had a legal loophole that he would use. Booze at the time was considered outlawed except for medicinal purposes, like I said, and what he did was he applied for federal permits to import liquor. While it was granted, it was only granted during the last 6 months of Prohibition, and Kennedy had already made millions off bootlegging. So, the final 6 months of Prohibition, then he files for oh Lord, why am I having a brain fart now? He applied for the federal grant, but only the last 6 months. So the 2 years prior to that he's doing this, he's fully getting away with it. But as I said, with the Coast Guard heat coming on, that's what he was told to do. File for the grant. You'll get the grant. It's only 6 months. You'll be fine. And that's exactly what he did. And he had already made millions upon millions doing this. Kennedy would also use these ships to smuggle in narcotics, mainly marijuana at the time. To really make it simple, he was the guy who gave the mob and nefarious people startup cash. And he had the availability to get his hands on ships that nobody could. The mafia at the time was using cars, using trucks, and they were bringing in whiskey from Canada into the United States. But Kennedy was able to procure ships to bring in rum and other liquors, which were hard to obtain from other countries at the time. It's long been asserted that Kennedy took his cut, his percentage off the top, and that's what truly enabled the mob to do what they did. But the mob also had a stranglehold on the shipping ports in other countries. And so could they have done it without Kennedy? No, because they didn't have the funds at the time. And Kennedy had access to United States ships, which the mob really had a tough time doing. So it was simply Kennedy saying, here, I got your hookup. I want my cut off the top. And that's what Kennedy did. We also have to kind of go back to the insider trading for a second. It's worth noting that at the time Kennedy was doing that, it really wasn't considered illegal. But once Roosevelt gets elected, he wants to rein in the insider stock trading. But he makes a very strange decision. He makes Joe Kennedy the chairman of Security and Exchange Commission. So Roosevelt and Kennedy had also criminal dealings together in the early days. And this is once again sort of Roosevelt patting him on the back, thanking him for a lot of help. And so what he does is he knows that Kennedy is doing insider trading and he's making all this illegal money. But Roosevelt also has to take a stand because the public is in an outcry about insider trading. And so Roosevelt's going to say, okay, we're going to stop all this, but I'm going to make Kennedy the chairman of Security and Exchange Commission, which is completely fraudulent. It's completely fucked up. And it's once again, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And it's a joke when you consider that Kennedy was essentially breaking the law in every single sense. But his relationship with Roosevelt was pretty nefarious. I mean, one might even speculate that Kennedy's not only bankrolled Roosevelt's election, but he also gave him huge kickbacks in the bootlegging and drug smuggling business. That, I think, is certifiable. I mean, Roosevelt doesn't want insider trading, yet he hires the biggest pump and dump schemer ever in the world to run the exchange. It's a little strange to me. Also in the 1920s, he ends up buying another bank in Boston. This particular bank would be the shadow funding for what he called his investments. Those investments were bootlegging and smuggling and buying dilapidated buildings, real estate, and other banks that were going under. So he's using profits, like I said, or investments from those banks to do all of this. He would also use the bank's money to bankroll every single operation that he got into without any oversight. So he's not using profits from legitimate money to do these things. He's using bank money to do these things. Illegitimate profits, which he launders through the banks. That's how he's doing this. Anybody that wants to challenge me on that can, and I'll give you documents that'll show the complete opposite. It's also worth noting that Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello had lunch together every single week. So the mere fact that people can try to speculate that Frank Costello and Joe Kennedy didn't know each other is completely bunk. They had a very close relationship. They had a lot of business together, and that business was illegal business. Even Costello on his deathbed lamented that he didn't really, looking back on things, Kennedy was a scumbag. His exact words were, "I should have never made that Irish piece of shit rich," because Costello was the one who sort of brought Joe Kennedy into the mix. Joe Kennedy did have the funding, but Costello regretted ever fucking helping him because of what would happen down the line. All right. So when the stock market begins to crash, Kennedy takes his profits and bank funds that were at his access to purchase tons of fucking real estate. By 29, he was worth over $50 million in today's money market, meaning inflation. By 1935, he was worth $3.2 billion in today's money. Listen, take away the bootlegging. Let's just think in terms of real estate. How the fuck does somebody go in 5 years and become a billionaire overnight? It doesn't happen. It just does not happen that way. The Kennedy's wealth was so massive that Hollywood ends up coming to Joe Kennedy. At the time, the studios were in a recession, and Kennedy would actually become a loan shark to the studios, and he would loan them money using the bank's money, and he would loan it at a huge rate, basically shylocking. He would then take sort of profits, and he would buy FBO Productions, which made small westerns, and they had a meeting with Kennedy, and they asked him to help, revive the industry, or at least revive FBO Productions, and that's what he does. But what he does, instead of just directly giving them loans, he then jumps in. He ends up buying the company from underneath of them, and then he brings in his own investors, which one could say that was sort of criminal, considering that FBO Productions just wanted him to invest money to get them out of hock. Let's revive everything. And Kennedy goes behind their back, which is something that Kennedy did a lot to a lot of other people. He was a fucking snake in the grass. And he basically goes behind their back, buys the fucking company, and then brings in his own investment people to sort of kick those that were in charge of FBO out of the picture. One of those investors was Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. So he doesn't go and get other bank investors. He goes and gets criminals. And that's a little suspicious, to say the least, for anybody that wants to try to attempt to say that Kennedy was on the up and up. He would eventually move to California to focus on the Hollywood studios issues. In those days, look, film studios were allowed to do or to own exhibition companies in which at the time was completely necessary to get their films on the big screens. So in other words, they would buy these little exhibition companies, throw their film out, let people watch it, and then if it was received well or made a little bit of money, then they would go to the big screen, and that's exactly what a lot of people were doing in those days. Kennedy was no different. Kennedy would use his mafia contacts, and what he would do would create a hostile buying out of by using mob muscle. This is how he acquires the Orpheum Theater Company. And here's what's important, so we don't get a little bit confused here. Basically, Kennedy realized that if he owns exhibition companies, he can control where films go. As a partner, as a financier of some things, he knows he can double up on his money, but he doesn't do this the legitimate way and just use his money to buy them. What he does is he creates a hostile buyout situation, meaning that he creates problems. Okay, well, you're going to have a strike. You're going to have this. You're going to have this. You're going to have this. You're going to have problems. Then he uses the mafia to come in and put heat and pressure on these owners or the investors to either sell or get hurt. And that's exactly what he does. And the reason why the Orpheum Theater Company was huge was because the Orpheum Theater Company owned more than 700 vaudevillian-style theaters across the United States. So not only is he just buying this, now he's got a fucking monopoly. Now he is controlling the flow. And he's not doing this legitimately at all. He's doing it absolutely illegitimately. He would later use the mafia again to help him acquire a studio called the Path Exchange, which he would then merge with another company and then merge it into OTC, back into Cecil B. DeMille's Producers Distributing Company Corporation in March of 1927, which fully rendered him monopoly. So not only does he acquire the Orpheum Theater, which owns 700 other theaters, but now he's using the mafia to take over the Path Exchange. He would merge that company along with Orpheum. Then he would take that, merge it into OTC. Then he would merge that with Cecil B. DeMille's company, Producers Distributing Company Corporation, and now he controls everything. He's got a complete fucking monopoly. Then, and later on in 1928, about a year later, he merged all the companies, and he makes a fucking ton of money. Merging them together was a conglomerate, and then what he starts to figure out is, okay, I've got pretty much everything, but I want something else. And what he wants is the Pantages Theater Company. And the Pantages Theater Company at the time was one of the biggest distribution companies in the fucking world. They controlled everything. So what Kennedy does is he offers $117 million, which was a gross overpayment, but Kennedy figures if I triple pay them for this, they'll sell. But they're not stupid. They know who Joe Kennedy is. They know who his investors are, the mob. So they say, fuck you, we're not going to give you shit. Kennedy is so fucking angry about this. What he does is he goes to the mob guys, and they begin to put pressure on Alexander Pantages, who obviously owned the Pantages Theater Company. And then what sort of happens is he refuses. He's not afraid of the mob. So then Kennedy steps it up a notch, and he frames him for rape. This is a well-known thing. And what essentially happens is they hire a girl to claim that Alexander Pantages raped her. He gets arrested. When he gets arrested, now he has all kinds of legal problems. His business is in trouble. He's in trouble. He needs fucking cash because he thinks he's going to go to prison, even though he's swearing up and down he didn't do a fucking thing wrong. So then what Kennedy does then is he says, I'll pay your legal fees, and I'll offer you $50 million for your company, which was like originally he offered $117 million. Now he's offering $50. He's lowballing. But because Pantages is so fucking scared, he just takes the deal. As the trial moves on, Pantages is literally found not guilty at his trial. And then Pantages goes on the assault, saying that Kennedy used the mob to set him up, that they hired the girl to set him up. And all the facts sort of point to Kennedy using the mafia to get what he wants, and he succeeds. It's also worth noting that the girl who accused Pantages of raping her admitted years later that it was Joe Kennedy and the mafia who showed up and paid her a huge sum of money to go to the police and file fake charges and to carry it out as far as it could go. So it's worth saying that Kennedy is using the mafia once again to get what he wants. Now, if that's not like criminal, I don't know what the fuck is. It's also worth noting that this girl that accused him of rape also admitted, like years and years after the fact, that the mafia was the one who owned Joe Kennedy, that he couldn't do anything without the mafia's help, and that she was so terrified of Joe Kennedy and the mob that that's the only reason why she agreed to take fucking money and lie, because she was that afraid. So Kennedy, from a very early age, knows how to use the mafia to get his business done, and it's a relationship that would last 40-some years. So Kennedy eventually gets out of Hollywood, and he uses most of that money to jump back into real estate. He would end up purchasing Hialeah Park Racetrack, which was down in Hialeah, Florida. This move was designed really, though, as a gift for the mob. He would buy it. He would become the front ownership for mob cronies, and it was sort of a thank you to them for them helping him out in California with the movie business. He would then buy distilleries and booze companies all throughout Canada. So in 1932, Roosevelt ends up running for president. Kennedy was the major financial backing in that presidential run in 32. In 1934, Kennedy, as a result, would be named to the head of the SEC, which is a fucking joke, but we said that earlier, to stop insider trading, which Kennedy himself was very, very guilty of. Kennedy's job was to clean up Wall Street. Kennedy would bring in lawyers, and they had four major areas to improve. They wanted to bring back investor confidence. They wanted to get rid of penny ante swindles. The exact things the Kennedys were doing. They wanted to end insider trading and information, and they wanted to establish rules and deadlines and guidelines that companies had to follow. And those are the deadlines and rules that we have today as far as trading with business owners and et cetera, et cetera. He would end up resigning from that post in 1935, which was only a year later after being named to that post. Roosevelt would then use Kennedy to intimidate anybody who spoke out against him in his political run. He ends up sending Joe Kennedy to Detroit to keep Father Charles Coughlin quiet. Charles Coughlin was a priest that was outspoken of Theodore Roosevelt. Coughlin had a weekly radio show where he would blast away against Roosevelt, kind of like what I do, but the difference was he was a priest. He didn't like Roosevelt. He didn't like big business. He didn't like big companies, and he would just rail against him on the radio. Roosevelt couldn't take it, didn't like it, so he goes to Joe Kennedy because he knows Joe Kennedy knows the mob, and he knows that Joe Kennedy could put pressure on him. Coughlin's core belief was that Roosevelt was a general piece of shit who was a tool for the rich and didn't give a fuck about the common man, which is absolutely accurate. He believed that Roosevelt was bought and paid for by the mafia and bought by rich cronies, the elitist, and he didn't like that either. Roosevelt's major problem was he was concerned that if Coughlin didn't shut the fuck up, that he would hurt him politically, and when Coughlin began to support Huey Long, who was his opposition, Kennedy absolutely springs into action by going to Pope Pius XII to have Coughlin stifled. And that's like fucking amazing to me, that Kennedy had so much juice that not only could he get to the mob for help, but because he wanted to protect Roosevelt, because Kennedy saw this down the line of, if I can get Roosevelt elected, I can get elected. And that's ultimately what Kennedy wanted. He was a backstabber, a bastard, a jerk-off, and he did this to everybody. He was not honorable in any sense business-wise. He was not honorable or loyal to anybody. He was very cutthroat. So the mere fact that he is able to get sort of the Pope's ear to get a priest shut up, or to get a priest to just keep his mouth fucking quiet, is amazing to me. And that's exactly what happens. Pope Pius tells Coughlin, shut up, you're done on the radio, or we're throwing you out of the priesthood, so to speak. And that's exactly what happens. Now, it wouldn't last long, but it was just enough for Roosevelt to keep the machine going. So, as a reward for helping Roosevelt, Roosevelt names Kennedy the ambassador to the United Kingdom. Now, Kennedy doesn't have any fucking political power. He doesn't have any accolades or skill set to make him a fucking ambassador. It's simply just a sort of a figurehead title for the wealthy, and this is what they did, and that's what he does. He names him ambassador to the United Kingdom, which he will regret. It was a gift, and like I said, it allowed Kennedy to use his money and sort of highfalutin ways to integrate himself into certain social circles. Kennedy was not accepted in all sorts of social circles. He wanted to be on the upper crust of the social circles, which would help him get elected, help him get more money, to help him move his money around. That's what he wanted, and he knew that if he was called an ambassador, that would be helpful in that way. It also gave him insider status. It would also make Kennedy's position good to run for the president in 1940 more soluble. He had every plan, every intention to sort of fuck Roosevelt in his ass and undercut him, and he knew that if he could get into these social circles, it meant his power was gaining or rising. It meant more money to run. It put him in a situation to make a run in 1940 a lot easier for him. The problem is World War II comes. And Kennedy actually supported Adolf Hitler and the Nazis over everyone else. He actually went so far as to speak out against Winston Churchill, which ultimately would lead to a huge fucking problem. Kennedy, even in World War II, attempted to get a meeting with Adolf Hitler. Not because Adolf Hitler at the time was doing something bad, but Kennedy liked the power. Kennedy supported Nazis his whole life. This is nothing new. Kennedy was an anti-Semite. He hated fucking Jews. And he would go to all kinds of lengths to speak out against Jewish people. Even before the bombing of British cities, which began in 1940, he pretty much tried to get a meeting with Hitler without the approval of the U.S. Department of State. He said he wanted to bring a better understanding between Germany and the United States, but that was bullshit. He supported Hitler. He supported the Nazis. He believed that Hitler getting rid of the Jews was a great thing. Kennedy would even double down on that, saying that the United States should not provide military aid to the United Kingdom or any sort of aid during the war. He would say, I will not save democracy from the Nazis, socialism, or fascism, which basically what he's saying is here is that he doesn't want to save democracy for Germany. He would rather socialism take over. He would rather fascist leaders take over. He didn't give a shit about what was about to happen to the Germans. He didn't give a shit about what was about to happen to the Jews. He supported everything that Hitler was doing. His views were considered absolutely atrocious for the time that they were in. He was even opposed to Britain or any attempt to ease war efforts during appeasement. So, in other words, he didn't want a peace accord. He didn't want the war to stop. He wanted the war to go on. He wanted Hitler to kill the Jews. He was in support of all that. He didn't even want the British, the Britain or the UK to even get any money for help for the war effort or for anything else. He was against America giving money to anybody other than the fucking Nazis. That is the truth, whether you want to accept that or fucking not. He would even go so far as to tell reporters that Roosevelt would fall and lose in the 1940 election, which further added to speculation that he was on the back end pretty much stabbing Roosevelt repeatedly from behind. In an effort to take over as president in the next election. So here he is, Roosevelt's giving him all of these fucking things, all of these prizes, all the awards for helping him, and here's fucking Kennedy in the background speaking out for Nazis, speaking out against our allies in a war effort, not giving a shit about the troops, not giving a shit about the war effort. He just wants the Nazis to fucking win. Because I think that he felt, we can get into McCarthyism a little bit here, but I think he was a big McCarthy supporter, obviously, which is sort of hypocritical because McCarthy wanted to sort of put out everybody that he thought supported Jews at the time. And that's what's kind of funny about this, because Kennedy hated Jewish people. He hated Jewish people, and he was all for the Nazis. So the mere idea that he's an ambassador to the UK and he's speaking out against Winston Churchill, he's against giving them money for the war effort, it's pretty egregious for the time period. If you can imagine a president today doing that, they would be thrown out of office almost immediately. So when Kennedy is in the United Kingdom, the bombing begins. He used a Nazi-owned airplane to get himself out of the area. It was seen as a huge slight to Britain, as even the British royal family and the Prime Minister and other ambassadors refused to leave, and they would basically bunker down and entrench themselves in the country. It was war. There were problems. They all hunkered down in the bomb shelters, and they stayed with the country because they believed in the country. Not Kennedy. Fuck that. I'm going to get a plane from the Nazis, and I'm going to get the fuck out of here. Fuck this. But if you're the ambassador of the United Kingdom, you should fucking be there. And it was seen as a cowardly act, a scumbag act. And so when news gets back to Roosevelt of what's going on, he's absolutely furious. Roosevelt pretty much wouldn't shit where he ate, however, because he knew at the end of the day that what Kennedy was doing was a fucking scumbag move. He also needed Kennedy's power. He needed his money if he wanted to run again. And so he also knows that he needs the Catholic vote to stay in office, and he needed the muscle of Kennedy as well as the mob. And so that's why he's not going to go against Kennedy at the time. So basically, he pretty much says to Kennedy, come and see me. And they sat down and they talked. And Roosevelt said, look, I don't like what you did, but I need your help. And so what he does is he asks Kennedy to back him in the next election, which Kennedy does in a public radio address. Roosevelt's great. Roosevelt's this. Roosevelt's that. Vote, vote, vote. Vote, vote, vote. But at the same time that they seem to be on the same page, on the back end, Kennedy was trying to ruin Roosevelt politically. Ultimately, his feelings on Nazis and what he did in the UK reduced him politically, which caused an effect where the American population would never ever allow him to run for political office. The American public, what he said about Nazis, he was very pro-Nazi. What he was doing to Roosevelt, the American public could see, and it effectively neutered him or rendered him ineffective to ever run for political office. That was the one saving grace for Roosevelt, the fact that he was no longer trusted. But that didn't stop Roosevelt from still using Kennedy and his connections. The other issue was that Kennedy, like I said, was anti-Semitic. He hated Jews. I said that earlier. And he would regularly go out of his way, be it reporters, radio addresses, to let people know he didn't like Jewish people. He, in fact, told reporters that Jews got what they deserved when it came to Hitler. The fact that he would say that publicly, the fact that he would say that amongst friends, was another reason why he pretty much rendered himself ineffective when it came to politics. So, as Kennedy realizes that his dream of ultimately becoming president was pretty much not going to happen, and that is, his long-term plan then becomes, okay, well, I can take over the government, I can become president if I do it through my children. And so what he wanted to do was make sure that a Kennedy would become president, and he would use his money, his mob affiliations, and his Catholic roots to ultimately get that done. So we have to fast forward to the 1960s for a second. So for the most part, Kennedy wants to control the government. He wants to be a president. He wants a stature, but he realizes that he's never going to be able to do it because of his sort of misdeeds. So what he wanted was his son, Joe Kennedy Jr., to run. But Joe Kennedy Jr. was killed in the war, and so then he goes to the next child, which was obviously John F. Kennedy, to be his replacement. Joe Kennedy realized a few things very early on. He knew that while they had Catholic roots, there was no way that John F. Kennedy would ever win a primary without help in West Virginia, who hadn't voted for a Catholic ever. Joe Kennedy also needed the help of friends and desperately needed the help in the Midwest, mainly Chicago and West Virginia. Why exactly Joe Kennedy didn't go to others in New York isn't really known, but he would end up going to one guy to get this done, and that guy was Frank Sinatra. And basically, the way that this went down was Joe Kennedy knew that if he was ever going to get the voting help and the financial backing of the unions and the workers, that he needed to get to Sam Giancana. Kennedy did not really have a relationship with Giancana at the time, and he probably could have gone to New York, but this was not a New York primary. This was a Midwest primary. That's where he needed the help, and he knew that the outfit controlled the voting districts and everything there. And he also knew that Frank Sinatra was tight with Sam Giancana, which he was. So he calls up Frank Sinatra. He asks Sinatra to come out to the compound to talk to him. And basically, at the time, Frank Sinatra was a staunch Democrat. Dolly Sinatra, who was Frank Sinatra's mother, was an abortionist, believe it or not. She performed abortions, but she was a Democratic runner. She was a Democratic heavyweight in New Jersey. So Frank grew up a Democrat. And Kennedy, knew that with Frank being a staunch Democrat, if they could get Frank on board to talk to the mob, not only could Frank do that for them, but Frank also was a Hollywood heavyweight, and they knew that they were going to need Hollywood heavyweights because at the time, people of the Jewish faith ran the studios, and that there was a very big backlash against the Kennedys because of Joe Kennedy's outward anti-Semitism. But with Sinatra, they could bypass that a little bit, and that's sort of how Sinatra comes into play here. And it's worth noting that this would be the last Democrat Frank Sinatra ever fucking helped. In fact, after the Kennedy thing, Sinatra would become a Republican. It would never speak highly of any Democrat ever again, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So Joe Kennedy needs the mafia's help, and through Sinatra, he essentially gets what he is looking for. So, like I said, Sinatra shows up at the Kennedy compound. With Sinatra being a huge civil rights advocate, they knew that he could get the African Americans to jump in as well. And so it didn't take much for Sinatra to jump on board because Sinatra at the time loved power, prestige as well. And I think that Sinatra also wanted inroads to the government, just kind of an ego thing. And so he needed Frank to sway the Hollywood friends and use the mob connections to get it done. And like I said earlier, he wanted Sam Giancana's help. Now, in return for getting the help, Kennedy promised the mafia they would be left to their own devices, they would be allowed to operate, and they would have no government interference. So Sinatra ends up reaching out to Sam Giancana through others, probably the Fischetti brothers, and the mafia really liked the idea of owning a president. And that was sort of the thing, is that, okay, we're going to help get this guy elected in any way possible. Now we're going to own a fucking U.S. president. We can do whatever the fuck we want. And that was sort of the mob's benefit to all of this. They would be left alone, and that's what they sort of wanted. So Sinatra gets the approval from Giancana, and then what he does is he begins stumping for Kennedy all over the place, using his celebrity friends to back him. The main issue when it came to Kennedy was that the status quo was worried about his inexperience. They were worried about his youth. They didn't like the shit his father said, and they were also afraid that it was really the father that would be running the presidency and not the son. Despite the fact that Kennedy was a great speaker and he was for civil rights, that was another thing that scared the shit out of the government, is that the government was afraid of African Americans at the time having a voice to anything. And so the government's perspective is they never wanted Kennedy in to begin with. They didn't like the father. They didn't like the son. They were very worried about a lot of things. It worried Richard Nixon to no end that there was an uprising of African Americans, specifically Martin Luther King Jr. at the time, and they worried that Kennedy was too subservient to African American needs. So you have a racial component to this sort of as well. On January 2nd of 1960, John F. Kennedy announces his candidacy for the Democratic National nomination. His challenger obviously was Lyndon B. Johnson, who absolutely always loathed John F. Kennedy. He despised him in every single fucking way. At the time, Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader. He was a complete fucking racist, and he desperately wanted Kennedy out of the fucking way. Kennedy would travel everywhere, but specifically, he would go to Catholic communities such as Boston, Providence, Chicago, anywhere where there was deep-rooted Irish communities, specifically Catholic communities, because he needed Catholic backing. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania was a major stomping ground for Kennedy. Kennedy knew he needed to win primaries to even give himself a chance to win the nomination. So it's no surprise that his first primary win was in Wisconsin, the Polish Catholics. Then the Chicago outfit began to pour a ton of money into the Kennedy machine, and Frank Sinatra repeatedly would hold fundraisers in the Midwest to sort of help Kennedy along his route. That primary win knocked out essentially Hubert Humphrey, but Humphrey, who would debate Kennedy, would debate Kennedy in West Virginia either way, which was one of the trouble areas for Kennedy. Kennedy would somehow win West Virginia, which was a huge shock to a lot of people, but not in terms of voters, but rather how it was done. West Virginia was not a Catholic stronghold. It was sort of a redneck stronghold. But what Kennedy did was he used his mob-controlled labor leaders, and ultimately, despite of Bobby Kennedy and his father's disapproval, Kennedy ends up naming Johnson as the vice presidential candidate once he wins the nomination. They didn't want Johnson in because they didn't trust him, and John F. Kennedy probably should have listened to his brother in this instant and his father, because Johnson was very involved in the Kennedy assassination. And we're going to get into that in part 2 of this show, but it's worth noting that he ends up naming Johnson his VP candidate rather than going with somebody else. They wanted to use a labor leader as his VP. For whatever reason, Kennedy didn't do that. But in Kennedy's terms, it was the lesser of two evils, naming Johnson as VP, because it essentially took away the rival. But he essentially pretty much lets the snake in the front door with open arms. Kennedy figures, despite the fact that he's Catholic, Johnson would end up bringing in votes from the South, which could look past his religious views, and they would back Johnson because Johnson was seen in southern districts and southern communities as a win-win for them. So it was kind of a smart move in a sense, but like I said, he lets the snake in the back fucking door. So as the campaign revs up, at the beginning of the fall general elections, Richard Nixon is leading by 6 points. The one thing Kennedy had to do was get the American population to understand that his religious views did not in any way, shape, or form construct how he chose to form policies or make decisions. And that was the big thing with Kennedy. He wanted them to understand, just because I'm Catholic doesn't mean that's how I make my decisions based on being a Catholic. It hurt him with Catholics in a lot of ways, because Catholic voters wanted him to make decisions based on his Catholic beliefs. And the fact that he came out and said, no, that's not how I'm going to make decisions, hurts him in a sense, but Catholics would back Kennedy in a storm. But it also made those who viewed Catholics as evil a lot less worried. So those that didn't like Catholics and thought Catholics were the epicenter of evil and debauchery and all this other stuff could really appreciate Kennedy coming out and saying, look, this is my religion. I believe in my religion, but that is not how I'm going to conduct foreign policy. That's not how I'm going to make executive decisions. So on one hand, he's pissing off the Catholics, but they love the fact that he's Catholic, so they'll vote. But he's also telling people that are Southern Baptists, Protestants, and etc. that that's not how his decision-making is made, and that makes them a lot less fearful of Kennedy taking over office. So ultimately, Kennedy goes on to defeat Nixon. Kennedy led Nixon by 0.2%, 49.7 to 49.5. It's worth noting that 14 electors from Mississippi and Alabama absolutely refused to support Kennedy because of his support for the civil rights movement. So how did Kennedy get this done? If he couldn't get the Catholic vote in all of these other places, and we look at the 49.7% and the 49.5%, that's 0.2% vote. That is a very, 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 very close. It's probably the closest race ever, right? So how does he get it done? And this is largely an area where everyone disagrees completely. Scholars are going to tell you that Kennedy won the election even-handedly in a close election. However, I don't believe that to be the case, and I disagree with them completely. So where do I stand? Look, it's easy. One thing I can tell you for sure is that if Kennedy doesn't win that West Virginia primary, he doesn't get the nomination, so it's over. He would never have gotten the nomination if he cannot win that primary. Look, he was fighting the odds first because he was Catholic. Secondly, he was fighting odds in a state which at the time was very much against civil rights. So in order to ensure the win, the mafia goes to bat for Kennedy. But their support wasn't enough. They had to control the unions through Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy Hoffa controlled the unions at the time, and they needed the union votes. That was step one. Step two would be getting a traditionally redneck state to vote for a Catholic. What the mob was able to do was control the voting booths. One of the ways that they did do this was they did double tap votes. They brought in their own controllers, meaning that when someone came in to vote for Kennedy, they would double tap the vote. 2 for Kennedy every time versus 1 for Nixon. So 3 votes. So going with this theory is I knew somebody years ago. This person was from West Virginia. This person was in every sense a legitimate guy, a union guy, not a troublemaker, not a lawbreaker, nothing like that. But what he told me was that he was hired, keep in mind this guy was 80 at the time or whatever, that he was hired by unions to make sure that he paid no attention to the names that came in to vote, but instructed the people that did come in to vote that the machines were faulty and that a double tap for Kennedy would ensure a secure vote. So he told them the machines are fucked up, you have to click twice for Kennedy, and that's the way your one vote will count. Now, while we can argue the validity of what I was told, this guy was not nefarious, he was not a criminal, but he did as the union told him. I'm not saying Kennedy cheated. I could never prove it, but in the history of West Virginia, a Catholic never won a primary. It's unheard of in something with some 150 fucking years. The mob knew that they had to get Kennedy the primary win. Otherwise, it's all over with. He doesn't become president, and they cannot own a president, which is ultimately what they wanted in the end, free reign to do what they wanted. That's exactly how Kennedy wins that primary. It's also been said that many dead people voted in that election. So take what you want from it, but the votes were rigged. The votes were simply fucking rigged. So the mob gets its man in the White House. They figure they can easily move him into any position that they sort of want. It's beneficial to them. They could pretty much go at free will and sort of, do whatever they want. And so by getting Kennedy in there, sort of gives them carte blanche into the government. So when we come back, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to get more into the Kennedys. All right, and welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking about the Kennedys. So, like we said just before the break, that the Kennedys get, the mob gets the guy in the White House, and they figured that they can easily move him into a position and do what they wanted. On the other side of that are those who truly run the government were weary of Kennedy. They were worried that it was Joe Kennedy pulling the purse strings of his son. They also worried that the Kennedy's youth and inexperience put the country into a bad position. It's long been said that Johnson was the guy who was the ear for the CIA and other organizations that were very, very fearful of a Kennedy win. So, what issues put John F. Kennedy into a jam? There were several, and I don't want to name all 50 of them because there are 50 things I could name that put Kennedy in a bad position, but that would take all day. So instead of talking about every single issue, because there's so many, we're just going to talk about the major ones. The first one, the Soviets. Kennedy's policy was dominated by issues revolving around the Soviet Union. In 1961, Kennedy was nearing a summit with Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Kennedy would overreact publicly and aggressively with Khrushchev after Khrushchev made a mundane, normal policy speech about Russia, and it had to do with the Cold War in and of itself. While Khrushchev was speaking really much in terms of domestic issues, Kennedy ends up taking it personally. His response would raise tensions between the countries, which was leading towards a meeting in Vienna. It worried the powers that be that Kennedy was taking the country towards a war over his inexperience and his penchant for retaliation. In June of 1961, Kennedy ends up meeting with Khrushchev. In those meetings, Kennedy allowed himself to be bullied by the abrasive Khrushchev. Those around Kennedy wanted him repeatedly to take a tough stance with the Russian premier and do not appear soft, do not appear weak. While Khrushchev thought Kennedy was pretty much impressive, he also thought that Kennedy was soft and very weak, but Kennedy allowed himself to be treated pretty much as a bitch. All Kennedy wanted was a treaty between Moscow and Berlin. Kennedy really viewed Moscow going near Berlin as a direct interference with U.S. access rights, and he would see that any move close to that as an act of war. After Kennedy returns home, Russia ends up signing a treaty with East Berlin, which would abolish the third-party occupation rights in either sector of the city, which meant that the U.S. pretty much was fucked. Kennedy just lost what he wanted. The move infuriated Kennedy, but more so to the powers behind the scenes, those that run the fucking government, because if you believe that the president runs the government, you're out of your fucking mind. The powers that be. They see Kennedy as being soft, and they see that his reaction was to think in terms of war. As a result of the treaty, 20,000 fled from East Berlin in fear because they thought that the treaty being signed, people were going to start getting killed. Berliners feared that the U.S. could not protect them any longer, further exacerbating the idea that Kennedy was soft. So now Kennedy on a world stage looks horrible. As a result, the Berlin Wall begins to commence, but Kennedy was okay with that wall as long as there was access from East to West Berlin, but the West Berliners ultimately lost faith in Kennedy and the United States completely. So now Kennedy looks like a bitch in front of those that run the government, and he looks like a bitch with other countries. It was really a bad issue. The second issue for Kennedy was Cuba and the Bay of Pigs. For starters, the mob had long controlled casinos and the gaming industry hotels in Havana. It was through Batista that Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano had established a base of operations. Cuba basically was a place 90 miles off the Florida coast that the mob used for gambling, narcotics, bootlegging, and the hotel industry. The island operated like a mob playground, and when Fidel Castro invades and tosses the mob out on its ass, that infuriates the mafia to no end. They wanted Castro dead, they wanted him out, and they wanted Batista back so they could go back to business as usual. They expected John F. Kennedy to uphold his end of the fucking deal. And the mob ends up losing hundreds of millions of dollars overnight, and they're fucking furious. Kennedy wanted Castro out. The Eisenhower administration had created a plan to overthrow Fidel Castro. The CIA, with help from the military, wanted to do an invasion of Cuba by counter-revolutionary insurgency composed of U.S.-trained anti-Castro Cuban exiles led by CIA paramilitary officers. It was Kennedy who reached out to the mafia once again and looked for the help. He knew the mob was very familiar with Cuba and exiles. and exiles, and through Sam Giancana, recruited Johnny Roselli to help. It was through Roselli that they end up finding the exiles, and it was through Roselli that they used land in Florida to help train them. It's also worth noting that they operated under a shell company called Zapata Oil, which was then owned by George Herbert Walker Bush. The intention of the government was to invade Cuba and start an uprising, hoping that it would lead to Castro's expulsion. The Bay of Pigs would begin on April 17th in 1961. 1,500 U.S.-trained Cubans landed on the island. The plan was to use air support if necessary, but Kennedy ultimately went against what everyone was saying and would fail to act using air support, which is likely what caused the operation to fail. The Cuban government would ultimately capture and kill the exiles, and Kennedy was forced to negotiate with the Cubans to release roughly almost 1,200 survivors. It infuriated the mob, it infuriated the CIA, it infuriated the backers, and it infuriated fucking Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a warmonger. Obviously, as the Vietnam War enters, we see that sort of warmongering. But basically, once again, Kennedy embarrasses himself. Cuba essentially shook down the Kennedy administration and the United States for $53 million of food and aid. Those behind the veil felt that Kennedy was more concerned with the political repercussions versus the military issues, which also infuriated the industrial complex. I mean, there's money to be made with war. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to stand tough. They're not going to let some asshole named Fidel Castro tell them what to do. And it also doesn't help that Kennedy blamed Johnson and everyone else for shitty planning. And then he bemoaned to them that they made him look bad politically and that they did it with every intention of making him look bad. And so the whole thing is they're trying to tell him, use air support. This is how we win this war. This is how we get what we want. He doesn't do it because he's gutless. And then he starts blaming everybody around him. And that's going to set the seeds for guys starting to say, this motherfucker's out of control, especially Lyndon Johnson, who hated him to begin with. So Kennedy gets pissed and he starts moving in a different direction. That direction, let's kill Castro by any means necessary. If we can't get the Cubans to do it, we will do it. The problem is that the Russians, Khrushchev and company, now joined Cuba in the fight. They would ultimately install missiles in Cuba. These missiles could easily reach the United States, and the consensus was that Kennedy had failed in every single fucking way to avoid the issue, and he failed to neutralize Castro. Kennedy was pretty much at this point in a no-win situation. He was taking a beating brutally inside the White House. He was taking a brutal beating with the government, the powers that be, with Johnson, the American public, the industrial complex. Everybody was fucking furious. So he's in a no-win situation. The National Security Council wanted Kennedy to do something. He already looked weak in many ways to other countries, to the American people. Now Khrushchev was essentially making him look soft again on a world stage for the second time. The government wanted him to act and end it. The issue was Kennedy did not agree with them. He felt it would be like Pearl Harbor in reverse if he did it. Instead of war, Kennedy gives in like a bitch. He would announce that all Russian ships would be searched and seized and inspected off of Cuba, which pretty much should have infuriated Russia, but it really didn't. Khrushchev just kind of laughed at the whole thing. But eventually, Khrushchev gives in, peace comes, and he ends up dismantling the missiles. But he sort of, once again, strong arms the United States and says, I'm not going to take my missiles the fuck out of anywhere unless you do a couple of things. One, you can never fucking invade Cuba again. Two, you have to remove Jupiter missiles off Turkey and Italy. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. And so what does Kennedy do? He acts like a bitch in terms of doing what another country wanted. He didn't have a backbone to stand up to other countries. So here we go again. He's bending over backwards. $50 million. We won't go to Cuba again. We'll even get rid of our defense missiles in Turkey and Italy. So he's really looking shitty in front of everybody at this point. These are the things that truly set the seeds for Kennedy getting whacked. Amongst other things. So, in terms of did the mob do it? Did the government do it? The government had more to gain by getting rid of Kennedy than the mafia did, and that's the truth. Do I personally believe the mob was also complicit? 100%, which we'll get into, probably more so in the second show. So the issue for Kennedy was that, like I said, he looked soft. He allowed Cuba, which is really not even a military powerhouse, to essentially tell him to shut the fuck up, get over it, give us what we want. Russia essentially tells Kennedy to get fucked, and they get what they want. It upsets everybody in power. Kennedy makes the country look soft, weak, and scared. Then there was Vietnam. Johnson took a hard-ass stance with Vietnam and wanted the United States to invade and go to war, which Kennedy was not totally against, but he was sort of neutral on it. Kennedy took the stance that Johnson... Kennedy takes a stance that it was Johnson that pretty much wants to back the war machine, wants war because there's money to be made. It's good for business, et cetera, et cetera. But he felt that Johnson, and he said this much to Johnson, that he wants to poke a nose into a problem for war profiteering, which really infuriates Johnson. Then Kennedy takes the stance that he just wants to be neutral. It's no shock after Kennedy was killed that Johnson takes the country right into Vietnam immediately. The problems for Kennedy at that point were mounting because he appears soft, and the people that got him elected felt that they picked the wrong guy to lead the country. They backed a guy they thought would help, and they picked really sort of a guy that was a good orator, a guy that could speak, a guy that was for civil rights, but a guy that was soft on foreign policy, and that's a problem. So Kennedy, through the CIA, really sort of offers a new directive. Let's get rid of Castro at any means necessary. So he wants him killed, but he wants 100% deniability. It was suggested that they use mob contacts to try to kill Castro. They had many variations of the idea, from poison to explosive, et cetera, et cetera. They would even bring in Johnny Roselli to help train Cuban hitmen to rid themselves of Castro, but the problem was that these men they couldn't get close to Castro. Castro was too smart. The mob offered to help in a million different kinds of ways. None of the ideas ever worked, and then Bobby Kennedy, for some reason, decides to grow balls. As John F. Kennedy promotes Bobby Kennedy to Attorney General, Bobby, in turn, for some fucking reason, launches a personal war and attack against the fucking mafia. Bobby knew early on that his brother got elected nefariously. He knew that his father had deep roots in relationships with the mob. He knew his brother got elected from help with the mob. He knew he was sort of a pocket man for the mob. And Bobby wasn't being really moral about the situation. It wasn't about being moral. It was about longevity. He thought that if he could toss and get rid of the mob, there would be no reprisals because his brother's the fucking president. Who's going to try to kill the president? So Bobby thinks, you know what? We're risking too much. Let's push these guys to the side. We got what we wanted from them. Fuck them. What are they going to do? I'll attack all of them and throw them in prison. They can't fucking touch us. And that was a fucking mistake believing that. Bobby Kennedy then begins launching into Hoffa. He launches into Giancana. He has Carlos Marcello kidnapped and tossed out of a plane with a parachute on over Guatemala, never thinking that Carlos Marcello could ever get back to the country, but he was wrong because Marcello does get back here. Then he consistently goes after Hoffa and the Teamsters that got his brother elected. Why John F. Kennedy never put a stop to his brother is beyond my understanding. From the CIA perspective, John F. Kennedy was soft, he was weak, and he was going after the very group that got him fucking elected and offered to help him. So he tells the mob, I need your help getting elected, gets it done. Then he wants the mob to help him get rid of Castro. They try to do that. Then he sicks his little bitch-ass brother on them. It was a scumbag fucking move. And it was Bobby going after fucking everybody. And then you look at the failures, the Bay of Pigs and Khrushchev and all of these kind of things. And it's just setting a fucking narrative and a storyline of getting Kennedy fucking killed. So from the mob's perspective, they lose money because of Castro, which was bad enough. But then the Kennedys fail to act, and then they fail on every other level. Then he lets his brother go after them. Then they were beyond angry at the situation. They felt that they owned Kennedy and that he had bit the very hand that fed him. Why they just didn't whack Joe Kennedy? That would have been my go-to move. You want to ask me what my go-to move would have been? I would have whacked Joe Kennedy. That's how you send a fucking message. I'd have whacked him, then I'd have whacked Bobby. Fuck him. So with Cuba, no longer theirs, and with Bobby acting like a fucking cunt, I mean, something's got to be done, right? Johnson doesn't like Kennedy. He'll do anything to get fucking Kennedy out of office. The CIA can't stand fucking Kennedy because he went against everything they said. The intelligence community thought Kennedy was a fucking troublemaker. They thought he was a right-wing fucking idiot. They thought he was a civil rights lover, an African-American lover, and they didn't like those things. And so now it's just simply a matter of time. Throughout the Kennedy history, they have, especially historically, they have always been able to make problems go away. And it's no secret how karma works, which is exactly what, like I said earlier at the top of the show, what we've seen with the Kennedys over the years. There has been so much karma to that family, it's sort of laughable to me. Now, as far as Lee Harvey Oswald, and this is where we're almost to the end of the show here, but I want to make a couple of things very, very clear. We know how the Kennedys got their money. We know how John F. Kennedy got elected. We know the problems that are mounting for John F. Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald was a spy. Anybody that tells you that he wasn't is full of shit. Oswald worked for the CIA. If you do not believe me, look it up. It's in government declassified information. That is factual. Oswald also had an uncle who worked for the Chicago mob who was partners with Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was a mob frontman in nightclubs and in the Midwest. So anybody who thinks that Oswald acts alone in this is completely fucking nuts. Anyone who thinks that he shot a magic bullet is nuts. For example, I'm going to mention one thing, and then we're going to cut the show and come back with episode 2, which is going to divulge into the assassination, the players, the reasons, the facts, and more. But I want to leave you with this. The Zapruder film. If you get shot from the back of your head, the front of your fucking head will explode. The front of your head will fucking explode. But if you watch, the bullet does not enter from the back. It enters from the front. Because the bullet hits the front, the back of the head explodes. If you're shot from the back, you are going to lurch forward 100 feet, not a foot. The back of his head explodes. That tells you that what the government tried telling you isn't fucking accurate. Kennedy was shot multiple times. Not once, multiples. Even just looking at the trajectories. The trajectories have proven he was shot multiple fucking times. How the hell could Oswald have shot from the book depository at Dealey Plaza, facing Kennedy's back, and yet the back of his head explodes and not the front? That's just my question. I think we've all seen movies when a guy gets shot in the front of his head, the back explodes. Because as the bullet's traveling in its trajectory, it's exiting. When it exits, boom, you get splatter and all that shit. The back of his head exploded, which means the shot came from the front. That's what I want to leave you with. That's what I want to leave you with. So, later on this week, when we come back to part 2 of this, we are going to talk about the mob wanting Sinatra dead for this. We're going to talk about the fallout with Sinatra and the mob, obviously. We're going to talk about the assassination itself. We're going to talk about Frank Sheeran. We're going to talk about the guns. We're going to talk about Oswald's past. We're going to talk about Jack Ruby's past and why Jack Ruby was allowed to frequent a fucking police station in Dallas when he was a known organized crime figure. Jack Ruby was not just some nutcase that went to a fucking police station and shot him. He went there 2 and 3 times, days before Oswald was even let out so we could get the lay of the land. They just going to let anybody walk in? We're going to talk about how George Bush, who was I believe, the head of the CIA at that time, was allowed or has denied that he was in Dallas, but yet there are pictures of him there. We're going to talk about Secret Service detail and how many Secret Service agents are usually there and why a quarter of them were pulled off that case. There's just a lot of things. And there's not just one entity to blame here. It's dozens and hundreds. We're going to talk about the fallout of Kennedy. We're going to talk about what Carlos Marcello said about the Kennedy hit. What other gangsters have been caught on wiretap saying about it. We're going to talk about Hoffa and his anger because it wasn't just Hoffa that was pissed. Dozens were pissed. And I'm going to leave you with this. It was Russell Buffalino that said that we killed the wrong fucking Kennedy. We killed the wrong one. And there you have it. So next week this week we will be back with part 2 of the Kennedys. In the meantime, please, if you can, donate to the channel. Every single dollar helps. $1, $2, $5, $6, $10, 1,000, 15 million. I don't give a fuck. Whatever you can do to help support the channel, we appreciate. We need every little nickel and dime because it goes towards updating servers, updating software, and everything else. Also, you can contact us at RealMobTalk7 on Twitter. Donate to Damian Trites if you can. If you would like to donate, the donation link will be in the bottom of the description box. All that being said, thank you for listening in. We will be back with the second episode this week.